Chapter 11:10. Thank you, fellow cultivator. If it wasn't for you, I definitely wouldn't have survived this time. Divine Son T got up and bowed to Tian Hunzi to express his gratitude. Tian Hunzi chuckled. He helped Divine Son T up and said, "Why are you being so polite, fellow cultivator? I feel like we've known each other for a long time. This is just a small matter for me, so why not? Since fellow cultivator has no hope of seeing a sage, why don't you come with me to the dojo?" Divine Son T turned his head to look at the empty void and sighed. He knew that Tian Hunzi wasn't lying. He sighed and nodded. "I want to see how wonderful your dojo is." Tian Hunzi was overjoyed. He pulled Divine Son T and took a light step forward. It was as if he used a power similar to what Divine Son T had used to come here. Instantly, the surrounding space-time changed, forming a space-time passageway. It brought Divine Son T away from this place, which had given him endless hope but eventually turned into despair. Luo Fan was attached to Divine Son Ti's body. He couldn't help but sigh as he looked at the scene in front of him. It seems that this is the starting point of the friendship between Divine Son T and Tian Hunzi. I just didn't expect Divine Son Ti's cultivation to be inferior to Tian Hunzi's. This isn't what I expected. The following time was naturally the process of Divine Son T and Tian Hunzi getting to know each other, establishing a friendship, and finally becoming close friends. During this process, Tian Hunzi also learned about what had happened to Divine Son T. He was furious and wanted to take revenge for Divine Son T by going to destroy the River Mountain sect. However, because Divine Son T wanted to take revenge himself, he didn't go. Even so, Tian Hunzi relied on his noble status as a disciple of the sage to cause a lot of trouble for the River Mountain sect. It caused a lot of trouble for the Hishan sect, which made the development of the Hishan sect extremely slow, and its power was constantly being weakened. However, the River Mountain sect was completely puzzled by this point. They couldn't figure out who was looking for trouble with them, and they couldn't figure out how they had offended experts that they couldn't afford to offend. This kind of confusion made all the higher-ups of the River Mountain sect anxious. Even their cultivation realm had stagnated because of this. To some extent, this helped to collect some interest for the hatred of the Divine Son. This lasted for hundreds of thousands of years. During these hundreds of thousands of years, the Divine Son Abadi had determined his highest goal. He was determined to improve. With the help of Tian Hunzi, he had traversed many dangerous places on Earth and in the universe. He had experienced countless life and death situations and had accumulated an immeasurably deep cultivation foundation. It allowed his cultivation foundation to grow in an unimaginable manner. Under such a crazy accumulation, his cultivation continued to rise. In just a few 100,000 years, he had already reached the pinnacle of great accomplishment quasi-sage, just a step away from the true pinnacle of quasi-sage. All that was left was a thin layer of barrier. In the body of the Divine Son of Body, Luo Fan was like the incarnation of the Divine Son of Body. He experienced almost all the dangerous situations on Earth and in the universe with him. Although he didn't gain an unimaginable accumulation like the Divine Son of Body, he also realized many truths that he had never thought of or even known before. This made his profound accomplishment, Dao Master realm, more stable, and he was one step closer to the exceptional realm of Dao Master. On this day, the Divine Son of Body was trying to break through to the peak of Sage to Be. As the chi and blood surged in his body, it seemed to be assimilated into a boundless world of chi and blood. It evolved into hundreds of millions of mysterious scenes of heaven and earth, bursting out with earth-shattering power. It shook heaven and earth, shook time and space, and stirred up all the laws in his Taoist field. The whole Taoist field was almost completely replaced by the world of chi and blood evolved from the chi and blood in his body. However, Tian Hunzi stood in his Taoist field, watching the Divine Son of Body making a breakthrough from distance. After hundreds of thousands of years of contact, the Divine Son of Body and Tian Hunzi had gradually become close friends. Because of this, their Taoist fields were also connected by them. There was a very mysterious connection between them, so that Tian Hunzi could stand in his Taoist field and sense all the changes in the Divine Son of Body's Taoist field. This was almost the same as the real Taoist field that Luo Fan had seen. Unfortunately, his accumulation is still a little bit lacking. I'm afraid he will fail this time. Tian Hunzi was already at the peak of Sage to Be. Although he hadn't made much progress in the past hundreds of thousands of years, he had already succeeded in breaking through to the peak of Sage to Be. Naturally, he could clearly see the current situation of the Divine Son of Body. Indeed, as Tian Hunzi had expected, the Qi and blood world around the Divine Son of Body had existed for dozens of days. Suddenly, a malignant tumor appeared out of nowhere and instantly erupted, engulfing the entire Qi and blood world. In just a few dozen breaths, the Qi and blood world completely collapsed. The violent explosion instantly turned the entire Divine Son of Body into nothingness, returning the sage's Taoist field to its original state. Then, the Divine Son of Body let out a cry, and blood spurted out from all the acupoints all over his body. He seemed to have turned into a blood-red hedgehog and looked extremely miserable. In the end, I still failed. The Divine Son of Body opened his eyes helplessly. He didn't care about the blood that was spurting out of his acupoints and just sighed. As he sighed, the blood that was gushing out of his body slowly calmed down. He sat there quietly, as if he had never been injured at all. However, the aura on his body seemed to be 1,000 times weaker than before. It even gave off a feeling that he was barely at the great accomplishment Sage to Be level. Sure enough, I still failed. Luo Fan sighed as he felt the various changes inside and outside of the Divine Son of Body's body. In the past dozens of days, he had followed the Divine Son of Body. It was as if he had become the Divine Son of Body. He sensed the changes at the same time and sensed the subtle and mysterious changes of the way of the fleshly body when he reached the peak of the Sage to Be. For Luo Fan, this was more important than all the previous breakthroughs of the Divine Son of Body. It was more rewarding for him. After all, Luo Fan was only at the great accomplishment Dao Master, which was equivalent to the great accomplishment of the Sage to Be level. Although this cultivation realm was many times stronger than that of the Sage to Be who had just reached the peak, there was not much difference in essence. They were both at the peak of the Sage to Be level. The experience of reaching the peak of the Sage to Be level in another way was, of course, of great benefit to him. It was a pity that the Divine Son of Body still failed this time. What Luo Fan had gained was just a lesson learned from a failure. Although there were many benefits, it was nothing compared to the benefits he could gain from a successful breakthrough. After all, the gap was still a little big. In another Taoist field, seeing the failure of the Divine Son of Body, Tian Hunzi was about to go to the Taoist field to comfort him. Suddenly, a strange wave enveloped the Divine Son of Body's Taoist field. Then, the Divine Son of Body disappeared without a trace. Luo Fan used the perception of the Divine Son of Body. He found that the surrounding time and space became blurred again. It was hazy, and the surrounding sounds became extremely strange. He could feel the existence of countless voices, but he could not hear what they were. At this moment, Luo Fan understood that this was a sign of going to meet the sage. I'm really curious. What does a sage look like? What kind of incredible mystery does a sage have? Luo Fan sighed in his heart. Unfortunately, the truth did not change because of his sighing. When it came to saints, the memories of the Divine Son of God would be covered with thousands of layers of gauze. He knew that it was a movie, but even if his eyes bulged out, he would never be able to see what was playing in the movie. All he could feel was the change in the Divine Son of Body and the words that the Divine Son of Body was saying. In the face of the Supreme Saint, the Divine Son of T did not dare to be negligent, nor did he dare to show his dissatisfaction for not being able to see the saint for hundreds of thousands of years. He could only bow respectfully to the saint and wish him a long life. After the Divine Son of T paid his respects, an earth-shattering sound reverberated in Luo Fan's ears, causing Luo Fan's entire body to shake violently. The feeling that his body could collapse and be destroyed at any time arose spontaneously. At this moment, Luo Fan knew that the saint was giving a sermon. He didn't dare to let go of this opportunity. He completely immersed his body and mind into the voice of the preaching. The feeling from last time appeared again. His entire body and mind seemed to be constantly being cleansed, becoming more and more transparent at every moment. This went on for an unknown period of time. When Luo Fan came back to his senses, the divine son of Ti had already returned to his empty place. His cultivation realm was already halfway to the peak of the sage-to-be realm. If he wanted to break through, it would only take him a few years. Being a disciple of a saint is indeed the greatest fortune for a cultivator. Normally, when a cultivator encounters a bottleneck, they can only try to break through it powerlessly. However, when a disciple of a saint encounters a bottleneck, a supreme saint will open an altar to help him break through the bottleneck easily. Luo Fan could not help but be envious of the divine son of Ti. After listening to the saint's sermon once again, although he only heard the strange sound in the divine son of Ti's memory, he already felt that his realm had loosened a lot. He felt that the strange shackles that prevented him from improving his realm had been broken. This made him very envious of the divine son of Ti and the others who were really listening to the saint's sermon. However, this feeling of envy only appeared for a short while. It did not really confuse his mind. He would not change himself because of this envy. Divine son of Ti, you are really lucky. I didn't expect to encounter a supreme saint sermon. I've waited hundreds of thousands of years for this opportunity. At this moment, Tian Hunzi appeared in front of the divine son of Ti and looked at him enviously. This is master's kindness. The divine son of Ti smiled slightly. Well, now that you've broken the shackles of your realm, you only need time to reach the peak of the sage-to-be. I won't disturb you anymore. Cultivate well. When you succeed, I'll take you to a wonderful space-time to travel, Tian Hunzi said with a smile. A wonderful space-time? We've been through a lot of dangerous space-time situations over the years. Which space-time could be called wonderful? The divine son of Ti couldn't help but be curious. Haha, that space-time is completely different from the many space-times we've experienced before. However, I think as long as you go through that space-time, you'll definitely have the power to easily erase the entire River Mountain Gate, Tian Hunzi said with a smile. The divine son of Ti was originally listening to Tian Hunzi with a smile, but when he talked about the River Mountain Gate, his smile stiffened. His smile froze, and a trace of pain flashed across his eyes. Tian Hunzi knew that he had said something wrong when he saw this. He couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed, but he couldn't say anything else. He could only casually avoid this topic. After talking for a while, he bid farewell and returned to his dojo. So many years have passed unknowingly. Ishan School. This time, I'll definitely uproot you. After Tian Hunzi left, the divine son of Ti floated in the void blankly for a while and said hatefully. After that, the divine son of Ti didn't care about this empty dojo. He slowly calmed himself down. He directly restarted the process of his cultivation breakthrough. As the chi and blood surged around him, it spread out in all directions in a softer way than the previous breakthrough, slowly constructing a huge world of chi and blood. It directly filled the entire dojo. When this world of chi and blood first appeared, it was like a piece of chaos. Although it was chi and blood, it was a piece of primordial chaos. It was not as complete as the previous time. This is the manifestation of perfect control of the extension of chi and blood. Luo Fan's eyes lit up when he saw this. He faintly understood some exquisite mysteries. The surrounding chi and blood didn't stop changing because of Luo Fan's senses. The primordial chi and blood suddenly split into clear and turbid parts, as if it had been split by a shocking thunderbolt. It opened up a wild, primitive, and desolate world. The thunderbolt didn't disappear between heaven and earth. Instead, it formed a god of creation in the void. It frantically spread its divine power, constantly transforming the chi and blood world. This caused all living beings to be born in this world according to some indescribable law. Gradually, the wild, primitive, and desolate world became full of vitality. Gradually, all living beings were born, and all kinds of complete and complex civilizations were formed. During this entire process, Luo Fan sensed the changes in the divine son of Ti and found that they were purely formed by his qi and blood. The divine son of Ti's thoughts were not involved at all. In other words, the various complex and mysterious changes in the qi and blood world were completely materialized by the mysteries contained in the divine son of Ti's qi and blood. They weren't controlled by the divine son of Ti at all. All the changes in the qi and blood world were completely natural. Even the divine son of Ti himself couldn't control what would happen in the next moment. He could only watch it passively. In other words, the qi and blood world was like a real world. It was the result of natural evolution. It was completely different from the world evolved by the mind of a cultivator. I see. I can't believe he's using this method to make a breakthrough. Luo Fan was secretly shocked when he sensed this change. Such a change was clearly the result of the divine son of body directly deducing his qi and blood, evolving it naturally, pushing the mysteries contained in it continuously, and finally pushing it to the peak of the sage-to-be level, thus driving his cultivation realm directly into the peak of the sage-to-be level. This breakthrough method was completely different from any other breakthrough methods that Luo Fan had seen before. It contained the most subtle mysteries of the way of the body, which allowed Luo Fan to vaguely reverse all his previous misconceptions about the way of the body. The way of the body was different from other cultivation methods. The way of the body cultivated the body and qi and blood, but not the power. Although cultivating the way of the body would allow one to use all kinds of power, the real root and the real essence was still the body. The body had a different essence from power. Any living being's physical body would never be under the control of its own will when it grows into a truly mature state. It was definitely the physical body that grew bit by bit according to its own laws. In other words, the physical body of any living being naturally contained its own powerful source. It was completely different from the continuous gathering, absorption, and condensation of power that was required to grow. There was no need to seek, gather, condense, and refine power like how it was for power. As long as a suitable environment was created for the physical body and it followed its own laws, the physical body would become stronger. This was the real way of the body. For example, using all kinds of power to refine the physical body, activating all kinds of magical powers and powers, integrating all kinds of strange powers into the physical body, and combining the physical body with all kinds of strange materials were all actions that neglected the essentials. This was not the real way of the body at all, and it was impossible to reach the end of this path. Understanding this, Luo Fan suddenly had a wonderful feeling of being enlightened. He felt that the fog in front of him had dispersed a little, and the path in front of him had also become clearer. He even had a feeling that his cultivation level was about to rise. This is the real root of cultivation. Luo Fan sighed in satisfaction. After comprehending the cultivation roots of the Tao of the physical body, Luo Fan looked at the divine son of body in front of him who was undergoing a breakthrough process. He felt as if he was displaying his comprehension in a direct way. Every change in the situation of the qi in blood heaven and earth directly reflected in his eyes a certain mystery of the qi in blood heaven and 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 earth. The entire qi in blood world went from barbaric to civilized, from weak to powerful. This corresponded to the qi in blood world going from misty to orderly, from weak to tough, and from weak to powerful. Chapter 1111. This change was so natural and so mysterious. The way of the body appeared in front of Luo Fan in a way that Luo Fan had never thought of. It made him feel like his understanding of the way of the body was constantly deepening at every moment. The knowledge that he had missed out on in his mind was constantly being reversed, and the aura that belonged to the Daoyuo Dao fruit he gave off was becoming stronger and more complete. The way of the body was all-encompassing, and it was the origin of all physical changes. Although Luo Fan's physical changes were not the same as the physical changes of the Divine Sun, and were closer to the physical changes of a saint, he could still find some foundation in the way of the body. He could see some of the mysteries of his own physical changes, and from there, he could gain a deeper understanding of the changes of his own physical body. This made it easier for all of his past cultivation achievements to integrate into his physical body, and this caused the aura of his physical body to change because of his comprehension. This time, the breakthrough process of the Divine Sun of Ti's body lasted longer than Luo Fan had expected. In fact, it was much longer. In Luo Fan's and the Divine Sun of Ti's respective expectations, the Divine Sun of Ti would at most take a few years to break through the bottleneck between the great achievement of Sage to Be and the peak of Sage to Be. However, in reality, the evolution process of the entire Qi and Blood world lasted for 9,999 years. Only then did it evolve from the desolate, primitive, and desolate state to its peak state. In Luo Fan's eyes, the abstract body that fully displayed the mysteries of the way of the body had also grown to its peak. It was the most powerful state, and this state, at the moment of its peak, directly gave rise to a kind of mystery that the Divine Sun of Ti had originally mastered. It was a level higher than the mysteries of the way of the body that the Divine Sun of Ti had originally mastered. In other words, at the moment when the abstract body grew to its peak, the Divine Sun of Ti's Qi and Blood naturally gave rise to the mysteries of the way of the body at the peak of Sage to Be. Thus, the Divine Sun of Ti's cultivation broke through the peak of Sage to Be and truly stepped into the peak of Sage to Be. This allowed him to complete the process of breaking through, which was thousands of times longer than he had expected. I see. At this time, Luo Fan did not care about the changes of the Divine Sun of Ti at all. At this moment, he focused all his attention on the world that had developed to its peak. He threw himself into the unimaginably powerful abstract body and tried his best to absorb the mysteries of the body Tao of the peak Sage to Be realm, which had just been born. His body was at the peak of Sage to Be. With this change, his body directly turned into an indescribably perfect fruit of the way of Zenith Heaven. It radiated an indescribable sense of perfection, and it even faintly emitted a feeling that it was above the Grand Tao. In a trance, Luo Fan knew. His cultivation realm had reached the peak of the profound Tao Master, and he was only a little bit away from the exceptional Tao Master. Tao of the Tao of Tao of the Tao of Tao of Tao. That Tao of Tao was that he, which being of divine peak of Tao of Tion. Tao of Tao of Tao of Xian of the Tao. Instead, it was because the mysteries of the Tao of Tao of Tao of Tao of the body of Divine Sun in front of him had made up for the defects that he had formed when he was comprehending the figure of the sage. As a result, the profound accumulation that he had accumulated while comprehending the mystery of the figure of the sage finally erupted with the power that it should have. Thus, his Tao of realm had made extraordinary progress. That was to say, the fundamental reason why Luo Fan could make such progress while observing the whole process of the breakthrough of the Divine Sun was that he had spent a long time comprehending the figure of the sage. Unfortunately, the defects of the way of Tao body are only a part of the many defects. If I want to truly achieve the Tao of perfection, I need more mysteries to make up for the many defects. Luo Fan could not help but think helplessly when he instantly sensed the source of all the changes. The figure of the saint that he had seen before was simply too incomplete. This kind of defect not only contained the mystery of the way of Tao of body, but also contained more Taos. Under such circumstances, even if he comprehended the way of Tao of body more deeply, it would only form a greater accumulation after he broke through the Tao of Master. it would be of little help to him in breaking through the profound Tao of Master and becoming a Tao of perfection Tao of Master, just like the figure of the sage had helped him in becoming a Tao of Master in the past. However, even so, Luo Fan was already quite satisfied. To be able to gain so many benefits from the experience and understanding of the Divine Sun, directly from the beginning of the Tao Master to the peak of the profound Tao Master, this was already a great achievement. It had long exceeded his previous imagination, so how could he be dissatisfied? After the breakthrough of the Divine Sun, the evolution of the Qi and blood world did not immediately stop. After the civilization of the Qi and blood world surpassed its peak, it began to decline. In this way, after hundreds of years, the entire Qi and blood world was completely destroyed and turned into a piece of primordial chaos. It returned to the situation when the Qi and blood world was created. At this time, the cultivation realm of the Divine Sun had completely stabilized at the peak of the Sage-to-Be realm. Although he was still at the peak of the Sage-to-Be realm, he was already close to the peak of this small realm. The speed of his progress was quite fast. It's a pity that my understanding of this Tao is still insufficient. Otherwise, the peak of the Qi and blood world would definitely be more than that. When the surrounding Qi and blood world dissipated, the Divine Sun sighed to himself. The evolution of the world of Qi and blood was the natural evolution of the various profundities of the Tao of the physique god. In other words, if the physique god's Qi and blood contained more profundities, the evolution of the world of Qi and blood would naturally be smoother. The peak of the world of Qi and blood would also reach a higher level. If that was the case, he would naturally be able to break through more limits, allowing him to comprehend more and make greater progress in his cultivation. However, it was a pity that this depended on his previous accumulation, understanding, and experience, which limited the peak he could reach. When the Divine Sun of Body completely stopped, the entire dojo did not completely return to its original state of nothingness. Instead, there were many faint lights and shadows left behind. Those lights and shadows were the fragments of lights and shadows left behind in the Qi and blood world. One by one, they seemed to have left behind countless densely packed space-time in the dojo. So that's how it is. This dojo is closely connected to the Divine Sun of Body. The changes in the Divine Sun of Body's mind naturally left behind traces in this dojo, causing all kinds of special scenes to appear in this dojo. Seeing this, Luo Fan understood the reason for these lights and shadows. He couldn't help but reveal a smile of realization. Vaguely, he already knew why the Divine Sun of Body's dojo would undergo such changes in the future. The Divine Sun of Body floated in the countless lights and shadows. Looking at the changes of the lights and shadows, he frowned slightly. After a long time, his eyes lit up. His figure merged into the entire dojo, and he had absolute control over this dojo. The entire dojo began to change as he had absolute control over it. The countless lights and shadows left behind by the Qi and blood world constantly merged in the void. In the end, it formed a strange space-time. This space-time occupied a small part of the dojo. It was like a planet floating in the middle of the dojo, flashing with a strange light. However, more space in the dojo was empty. In this world where many lights and shadows merged, it wasn't the same as the previous Qi and blood world. Instead, it formed a completely unfamiliar space-time. Although there were also many traces of the Qi and blood world, it was a completely different space-time. Among them, there were all kinds of living beings and completely different civilizations. You seem to be in a good mood. I didn't expect you to have such a playful mind. At this moment, Tian Hunzi's voice came from outside the dojo. Then, Tian Hunzi's figure passed through the barrier of the dojo and appeared beside the Divine Sun of Body. It's just a momentary enlightenment. I want to stabilize my current enlightenment and compare it with my future enlightenment. It's just a small trick, the Divine Sun of Body said with a smile. That's a good idea. Maybe I can try in the future. Tian Hunzi's eyes lit up when he heard this. All right, now that I've completed my breakthrough, I wonder where the space-time you're talking about is. Why don't we quickly go and take a look? The divine son of body changed the topic and reminded him. Tion Hunzi had come for this, so he naturally nodded without hesitation. All right, I've been waiting for this day for hundreds of thousands of years. I've been prepared to take you to that space-time ever since I first saw you. Even Luo Fan couldn't help but be curious about that space-time, let alone the divine son of body. Tion Hunzi then took out a talisman made of countless runes and handed it to the divine son of body. I've already marked that space-time. Let's go now. The divine son of body took the talisman. At the same time, Luo Fan also sensed the many space-times recorded in the talisman. These space-times were actually similar to the many proofs of dojos that Luo Fan had obtained from the teleportation tree door. The only difference was that there were fewer space-time coordinates than the proof that Luo Fan had obtained. Among these coordinates, there was one that was very obvious. It was obvious that it had been marked. Could this space-time also be a dojo given by the sage? The divine son of body asked in surprise. I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But even if that's the case, it's too long ago. According to my calculations, it should be something that happened hundreds of trillions of years ago. There are no longer any traces of the saint's lineage in that place. It's no different from a naturally formed world. Tion Hunzi smiled. As the two of them spoke, they left the dojo and arrived at Earth's universe. According to the coordinates, they arrived at the bottom of the sea near the Kuru continent in the northeast. They arrived above a magma flow that had appeared at the bottom of the sea. Indeed, it's no different from a naturally born world. If there are still traces of the dojo given by the sage, why is the entrance of this world so obvious? It's directly attached to the magma flow at the bottom of the sea. The divine son of body arrived and saw the scene, so he was convinced of Tion Hunzi's words. This world is very strange. You must be careful when you enter. Don't be careless, Tion Hunzi said to the divine son of body solemnly as he looked at the magma flow. The divine son of body was even more curious when he heard this. He was already at the pinnacle of the quasi-sage realm. The Tao of the fleshly body made his defensive ability as strong as an existence at the pinnacle of the great accomplishment of the quasi-sage realm. Even under such circumstances, Tion Hunzi still told him to be so careful. However, he also knew that Tion Hunzi wasn't someone who spoke without thinking. Hence, he raised his vigilance to the highest. He nodded at Tion Hunzi. Tion Hunzi didn't say anything else. He raised his hand and pointed at the magma flow. In an instant, an illusory image appeared above the magma flow. It was a strange place. It was colorful and strange. With a single glance, one could tell that it was a different world. However, no matter how one looked at it, one could not clearly see what was inside. There's the aura of a world that I've been to before. The divine son of body sensed the image, and his expression changed drastically. At this moment, Luo Fan also sensed the aura coming from the magma flow. It was a kind of neutral and peaceful aura. However, it contained an aura of destruction. It was just that the aura of the giant was much weaker than what he had seen in Tion Hunzi's Taoist rite. This is the aura of the demon realm. However, it's too weak. It's not the real demon realm. Luo Fan was secretly surprised. He was looking forward to it. He was also uneasy. He was looking forward to seeing some of the mysteries of the demon realm from this space-time. Ever since he knew about the existence of the demon realm, he felt that there were many unimaginable secrets in the demon realm. It might even be closely related to the fate of the earth and the universe. It might also be related to some plans of the sages. What made him uneasy was that the divine son of body had also entered the space-time that seemed to be the demon realm. However, at that time, his memory was blurry. In other words, there was some kind of power that prevented Luo Fan from peeping into that memory. As a result, Luo Fan couldn't see the true appearance of that space-time. The space-time below had the aura of the demon realm. Would it have the same characteristics? Would he also be unable to see it clearly and gain nothing? Ah, so you've entered a similar world before. Tion Hunzi couldn't help but be startled. Yes. However, The aura of the world I entered was 100 times stronger than the aura of this space-time, said the divine son of body. I see. It seems that you've entered the real demon realm. I didn't expect you to be able to come out after entering the demon realm. No wonder you were accepted by Uncle Master Hongmei. Tian Hunzi came to a sudden realization. What's the demon realm? The divine son of body was inexplicably surprised. You'll know about these things in the future. Since you've entered the demon realm before, that's even better. I don't need to worry about you encountering danger because of your lack of experience. Let's go in quickly. Tian Hunzi smiled. Since Tian Hunzi had said that the divine son of body naturally couldn't say anything else, he immediately stepped into the many lights that appeared above the lava flow with Tian Hunzi. The space-time changed. In the blink of an eye, the two of them had already arrived at a strange space-time. When the divine son of body stepped into this strange space-time, Luo Fan felt both happy and helpless. He was happy because his senses weren't absolutely blocked like when he first entered the demon realm. He couldn't sense anything in the outside world at all. However, he was helpless because although his senses weren't absolutely blocked, they weren't completely unobstructed either. The world he saw was still extremely distorted, and the sounds he heard were also extremely blurry. The result was that when he tried hard to distinguish, even the voice of Tian Hunzi, who was standing next to the divine son of body, seemed to be coming from the sky. It was blurry and very difficult to distinguish. The world in his eyes was still colorful and strange, and he could only occasionally make out the silhouettes of some huge objects. Bang! A loud sound was heard. The divine son of body began to shake violently. His blood and chi surged crazily. Thousands of magical powers were instantly cast by him. He began an extremely intense battle with a huge human silhouette that suddenly appeared in front of him. The huge human silhouette was unimaginably powerful. Even though Luo Fan could only faintly sense its vague aura, he knew that this human silhouette was definitely not weaker than the divine son of body. At this moment, the divine son of body's fighting spirit was extremely high. He began to pour out the power he had after becoming a peak sage-to-be without any reservation. Every move he made shook the space-time, collapsed it, and broke time. He even shouted, "Tian Hunzi, what's going on? Why are the living beings here so powerful? This doesn't make sense at all. Even the living beings I met in the demon realm weren't this terrifying." At this moment, Tian Hunzi also seemed to be engaged in an extremely intense battle. The voice that seemed to come from the sky reached Luo Fan's ears. This is how this space-time is. Even the weakest living being here is equivalent to a peak sage-to-be. Moreover, its combat power is stronger than that of a normal peak sage-to-be. Its combat ability is as terrifying as cheating. It's really a wonderful place to hone one's combat experience and stimulate one's soul. If not, why would I have waited until now to bring you here? As for why the living beings here are stronger than those in the demon realm, I don't know. If you're interested, maybe you can find out the reason yourself. However, the most important thing now is to fight. A crazy fight. A fight to the death. Ha ha! Why didn't I realize that this person's fighting spirit was so amazing before? I'm not careful when making friends. The divine son of body sighed helplessly. This space-time was extremely suitable for him. It could let him undergo training that was thousands of times stronger than in the universe on Earth. Of course, he was very satisfied to enter this place. However, that didn't mean that he was willing to enter this space-time abruptly and encounter such a cruel battle so abruptly. Chapter 11-12. In the following long period of time, both Divine Sun Ti and Tian Hunzi were fighting Jili almost all the time. Their opponents were at least as powerful as the creature that the Divine Son of Ti had encountered at the beginning. There were even terrifying existences that were comparable to those that had set foot on 2 or 3 steps. However, the Godson and Tian Hunzi would naturally fight against those that were like the powerful existence they had encountered at the beginning. They would unleash their strongest power to destroy them. If they encountered terrifying creatures that the two of them could not resist, such as those that had set foot on 2 or 3 steps, they naturally would not be foolish enough to fight them to the death. Instead, they would quickly leave when they sensed their existences from afar. Of course, they could escape most of the time. However, there were many times when they were discovered by creatures that they could not resist, and they would be hunted down crazily. As a result, the two of them had to cooperate closely and unleash all of their potential. They would even pay a terrible price to be able to escape. Every single experience like this was an indescribable baptism for them. It allowed them to comprehend many principles that they originally needed a long period of time to comprehend, and it was then used on their cultivation, allowing their cultivation to increase correspondingly. While the two of them were living in such a jiley state, Luo-Fan was actually quite depressed. This space-time contained many auras from the demon world. Although it could not completely isolate his senses, it greatly interfered with his senses. He could only see blurry shadows in the outside world, and all the sounds he heard seemed to come from beyond the sky. As such, he could only roughly understand the battles that the Divine Son of Ti and Tion Hunzi had experienced through the Divine Son of Ti's physical state and the blurry sounds and shadows in the outside world. As such, it was clearly impossible for him to obtain the various battle experiences that the Divine Son of Ti and Tion Hunzi had obtained in this space-time. As such, it was difficult for him to comprehend principles that he did not know before. Because of this, after the Divine Son of Ti and Tion Hunzi had fallen into this space-time, Luo-Fan felt that there was a treasure in front of him, but he could not obtain it at all. It was as if hundreds of claws were scratching his heart. On this day, the Divine Son of Ti was in the shape of a long strip. The sound it made was like a dragon's roar. After it was torn to shreds, it suddenly stopped in midair. Then the blood and chi in his body surged. His entire body did not require any energy to transform. Naturally, he broke through the limit. It had entered a whole new stage. You've reached the pinnacle of the great circle of quasi-sage realm so quickly. How enviable. Luo-Fan felt the change. He could not help but feel helpless. Such a situation had already happened to the Divine Son of Body once. That seemed to have happened hundreds of thousands of years ago. After that, the Divine Son of Ti was no longer at the peak of the Sage-to-Be realm. Instead, he had become a minor-tier quasi-saint. From this point of view, it was obvious that the Divine Son of Ti had officially broken through the initial tier of peak Sage-to-Be and reached the great tier of peak Sage-to-Be. Even though Luo-Fan knew that Feng Xingjian was a disciple of a saint and that this was just a memory, he could not help but feel secretly unbalanced. However, of course, it was just an imbalance. He had his own Tao and his own cultivation rhythm, but he would not really be jealous of anyone. After a while, Luo-Fan concentrated on observing the changes that were happening in the Divine Son of Ti's body at this time, feeling the mysterious changes that occurred in the process of breaking through the initial tier of peak Sage-to-Be to the great tier of peak Sage-to-Be. Now, Luo-Fan was only a Tao master at the great tier, which was equivalent to the great tier of peak Sage-to-Be. Such a realm could actually be said to be on par with the Divine Son of Ti's realm after breaking through. In this way, it was obvious that the Divine Son's way of the body was no longer as insignificant to Luo-Fan as before. Many of the mysteries contained in it could greatly enlighten him and deepen his understanding of the profound Tao Master realm. It was of great benefit to him to break through to the profound Tao Master realm and reach the exceptional Tao Master realm. While Luo-Fan was eagerly feeling the mysteries of the Tao of the Divine Son of Ti's body, the process of the Divine Son of Ti's breakthrough was gradually completed. Even though Luo-Fan was only attached to the body of the Divine Son of Ti and could only sense the inside of the body clearly, he could still feel that the aura of the Divine Son of Ti was hundreds of times stronger than before. I didn't expect you to make such a fast progress, Taoist friend. You've actually caught up with me now. It seems that it won't be long before I fall far behind. Tion Hunzi's voice, which seemed to come from the horizon, came into Luo-Fan's ears. I'm still far behind you, Tao's friend. The divine son of Ti did not say much and just said this. In fact, there was no time for him to say anything more. At this time, a shocking and unparalleled aura came from the sky. Under this aura, Luo Fan even felt that the originally distorted and blurry scene around him had become even more distorted and blurred. Run! The divine son of Ti roared. His body instantly tore apart space-time and fled into the distance. Tian Hunzi's movements were not much slower than the divine son of Ti. The moment the divine son of Ti left, he also used a similar method to escape. This is the most powerful living being I've encountered since I entered this world. Luo Fan instantly understood. Divine Son Ti and Tian Hun panicked like stray dogs. In the blink of an eye, they had fled hundreds of millions of kilometers away. They appeared in an empty area that did not have many powerful auras. After appearing, the two of them did not relax at all. They continued to tear apart the void and burrow into it, continuing to escape frantically. The moment they escaped, the extremely terrifying aura, which even made Luo Fan feel that the surrounding space-time was interfering with him even more severely, suddenly descended and completely shattered the space-time. The shattered space-time entered the depths of space-time and directly attacked the backs of the divine son of Ti and Tian Hunzi. The divine son of Ti's body instantly became extremely tattered. Even the flow of qi and blood was obstructed. So powerful. It's at least a being who has set foot on the fourth step. Based on the changes in the divine son of Ti after he was affected by the aftermath of the aura, Luo Fan instantly gauged how powerful the owner of the aura was. Of course, this was only a rough estimate. After all, he did not know exactly how powerful someone who had set foot on the fourth step would be. However, he knew the limits of someone who had set foot on the third step. The owner of the aura in front of him was obviously not someone who had set foot on the third step. Therefore, he guessed that the owner of the aura was someone who had set foot on the fourth step. You can't escape. To that existence, this entire space-time is nothing. This entire space-time is the same as its cave abode. No matter where we run, we won't be able to escape. Tian Hunzi's somewhat anxious voice seemed to come from the horizon. Then what do we do now? Leave this space-time immediately. The divine son of Ti roared. Fortunately, the two of them had already entered a state of shifting space-time. Although they had suffered great injuries, this did not slow down their escape process. Because of this, their speed didn't slow down much. No, we can't escape this space-time. We still have another way. However, this method was like putting oneself in a hopeless situation. If one was not careful, one would die. If we're not careful, we'll need to activate our trump card to escape. Think about it. Do you want to choose this method? Tian Hunzi said. What method? What's the advantage of leaving this space-time? The divine son of Ti asked directly. This method is to go to the center of this space-time, where the aura of the demon realm is the strongest. The advantage is that the creature there doesn't dare to unleash too much power. Otherwise, it might be devoured by the aura's source. We can then have a relatively fair fight with it. Tian Hunzi said, All right, let's go there. The divine son of Ti said without hesitation. The divine son of Ti was also a proud person. After being chased by that creature to such a sorry state, he was like a stray dog. How could he be willing to escape this space-time just like that? Now that he had heard that they could weaken the creature there and give the two of them a chance to fight it, how could he still choose to escape? In any case, even if they failed to go there, it would not cause any irreversible damage to their lives. At most, they would only trigger an escape treasure given by his master. Although a venerable saint would not make arrangements for his disciples like a nanny, it was impossible for him to not care about them. When they encountered an enemy they could not resist, they would definitely not be stingy with their escape methods. Whether it was the divine son of Ti's master, the Grand Mist ancestor, or Tian Hunzi's master, the Taishang Tao ancestor, they would definitely have similar methods. This was also the trump card that Tian Hunzi had mentioned. With such a trump card that could allow them to escape at the last moment, The divine son of T naturally had the confidence to choose to take the risk. After the two of them reached an agreement, they immediately changed directions and quickly headed towards the location that Tian Hunzi had mentioned. During this process, their injuries healed at an unimaginable speed. Luo Fan did not know what method Tian Hunzi had used, but Luo Fan had clearly seen the method that the divine son of Ti had used. The divine son of Ti cultivated the path of the body, so his body's recovery ability was already unimaginably powerful. He did not even need to use any methods himself. After his body was injured, the potential of his body would naturally be triggered, forming an unimaginable recovery ability that allowed his body to quickly recover to its peak. The place with the densest demonic aura. Looks like I'll probably fall into the same state as before. I won't even be able to see the outside world, and I won't even be able to hear vague sounds. Luo Fan sighed in his heart. In this vast area of control, the demonic aura that was not too dense was already able to interfere with his senses, making it difficult for him to see the outside world clearly. He did not need to think about what would happen if the aura was even denser. The source of the densest aura obviously could not be directly in this world, but could only be in the depths of this world. At least, it was not something that could be reached by ordinary means. However, this was obviously not a problem for the divine son of Ti and Tian Hunzi. Both of them had their own exquisite methods, and their bodies were constantly in the state of moving through space-time. However, they kept increasing their strength during the process, constantly changing their direction according to some strange law. As they changed, Luo Fan felt that his senses were being interfered with more and more. He did not know when, but he had already fallen into the same state that the divine son of Ti had when he had entered the demon world. Everything in the outside world was completely isolated from him. As expected, Luo Fan could not help but feel helpless. During this process, the passage of time seemed to have become meaningless. In a trance, it seemed like billions of years had passed, but it also seemed like only a short moment had passed. All of a sudden, Luo Fan's eyes lit up. The interference that had existed since he had stepped into this space-time had completely disappeared. The world around him was no longer blurry light and shadow, and the sounds around him were no longer like they were coming from the sky. Instead, they became extremely vivid and clear. Luo Fan thought that the divine son of Ti and Tian Hunzi had escaped from that space-time and returned to Earth. He was just about to calculate how long had passed. Suddenly, he was slightly stunned. I'm actually still in this space-time? He looked at the outside world with the divine son of Ti's eyes and saw that he was surrounded by an incomparably huge vortex. The aura emitted from the vortex was calm, but it also had an incomparably strong intent of destruction and extermination. It was the aura of the demon world. Moreover, these auras, compared to what Luo Fan had felt in the past, any aura related to the demon world was much stronger. It had to be firm. It wasn't just the aura that Luo Fan had sensed in the space-time. It was even the aura that had emitted from the divine son of Ti when he had opened the door to the demon world. Even the aura that he had sensed from the supreme demon venerable in Tian Hunzi's dojo was far inferior to the aura emitted from the vortex. The divine son of Ti and Tian Hunzi were currently in a strange position near the center of the vortex. They were looking at the huge vortex with an indescribable expression. Is this the saying that things will move in the opposite direction when they reach an extreme? Luo Fan looked at the vortex, and this was the only thought that came to his mind. The vortex was formed by a very strange existence. This existence was similar to an aura and power, but it was neither an aura nor power. From time to time, strange creatures would shoot out from the center of the vortex like cannonballs. They would directly rush out of the vortex and into the vast, unfathomable darkness above the vortex. These creatures came in all shapes and sizes. Some were in the shape of giant humans, some were in the shape of giant tigers and leopards, and some even had thousands of arms and legs. However, no matter what they looked like, they were extremely powerful. Even the weakest of them had the strength of a peak quasi-sage. The stronger ones were like cultivators who had reached the second or third step. When these creatures were spat out of the center of the vortex, they were unconscious, as if they had been sealed by some kind of power. There was a faint life force coming from the pitch-black area that they were heading towards. It seemed like the life force itself was extremely powerful, but because it was extremely far away, it seemed so faint as if it didn't exist. This is the source of the change in space-time. All the traces of the disciples of the sage were gradually erased from here. Tian Hunzi said to the divine son of Ti as he looked at the changes in the center of the vortex. This should lead to the demon world, right? The divine son of Ti said in shock. I don't know about that. No one has ever entered from here before. However, I'm guessing that this should be the case, Tun Hunzi said with a smile. If it's the demon world, then what are these creatures? The demon world is boundless, and there are countless experts inside, but it's impossible to find so many peak quasi-sages so easily, right? The divine son of Ti looked at Tian Hunzi in confusion. The divine son of Ti wasn't completely clueless about the demon world. Although he was very weak when he first entered the demon world, he was only a peak innate zenith heavenly god and hadn't even become a quasi-sage. However, he had already entered the demon world and had a rough understanding of the situation there. Of course, he had the right to ask such a question. I've never been to the demon world. Tian Hunzi sighed with a hint of regret in his voice. However, I've learned a lot about the situation there from many people who have entered the demon world before. There are many dangerous forbidden areas in the demon world, and almost all of them are forbidden areas for living creatures. This place might be connected to one of those forbidden areas. Forbidden areas of the demon world. The divine son of Ti frowned and thought to himself. In the end, he sighed helplessly. If Ruo is really connected to a forbidden area, then there are too many possibilities. It's impossible to determine where it is at all. Roar. At this moment, a terrifying roar came from nowhere. Then, a primitive creature that was about 30 meters tall and wore an open-shoulder shirt made of strange animal skin appeared above the whirlpool. It looked like a primitive man and roared at the divine son of Ti and Tian Hunzi. This creature's eyes were cloudy and occasionally flashed with a bit of wisdom. His beard was like steel needles that extended to his ears and connected to his hair. His thick and long hair draped over his back like a huge cloak. As he stood there, he naturally gave off the feeling that he was a volcano that could erupt at any time. Anyone who saw it would be shocked. It really doesn't dare to be unbridled here. Even its aura is restrained now. The divine son of Ti was not shocked, but delighted when he saw this creature. Chapter 11:13. Although the life forms in this space-time were extremely powerful, they also had some great drawbacks. This drawback was none other than the fact that their intelligence was far inferior to that of ordinary cultivators, or rather, such powerful beings. In other words, compared to cultivators, they were more like wild beasts. Of course, it was only like that. It wasn't as if he had truly fallen to the level of a wild beast. Perhaps the thinking ability of the living beings in this space-time was much worse than that of normal living beings. But their battle instincts and the power of their divine abilities were definitely not weakened by much. Although they lacked intelligence, they did not lose much of their battle instincts. That was why God's Son and Tian Hun's performance was so good after so many years of battle. If these creatures were as intelligent as real cultivators, Divine Son Ti and Tian Hunzi would have been surrounded and attacked by many creatures for acting so fearlessly in this space-time. God knows how many years ago they would have needed to use their respective trump cards to leave this world. If it weren't for the fact that their battle instincts and abilities weren't much weaker than normal, the two of them wouldn't have been able to succeed in every endeavor. In fact, they would even have to flee from beings that were much more powerful than them. Otherwise, if the living beings they encountered were as intelligent as wild beasts and only knew how to use brute force, they would not be a threat to them no matter how powerful they were. Moreover, even a great accomplishment of Sage-to-Be could do whatever they wanted in this space-time without any danger. This was just like the world Luo Fan lived on in his previous life. In terms of strength, How could ordinary people compare to wild beasts like tigers and leopards? But weren't the owners of Earth those ordinary people? That was the logic behind it. Although they were at different levels, their essence was the same. In the past, God Abadi and Tion Hunzi did not understand why the living beings in this space-time were so strange. However, after arriving at the source of the aura, they roughly understood the reason. Those creatures had become like this. It should be because of the huge vortex in front of him. It was this vortex that stripped away the intelligence of those powerful creatures in the devil realm, making them countless times dumber than ordinary cultivators. Even though they had complete battle instincts and the power of their abilities, they could not use them to their fullest. As a result, they were able to easily defeat cultivators when their spiritual intelligence was still intact and flaunt their prowess among them. How could this be? Divine Son T exclaimed. His eyes were filled with an incomparably serious light. In his eyes, the image of the powerful primordial being, who had a rough face and was clad in animal skin, instantly changed. Although he was fearful before, he still looked down on them in his heart. He looked at it with a condescending attitude. But at this moment, after knowing that it actually possessed quite a bit of intelligence, he felt an indescribable shock. This whirlpool was able to completely erase the intelligence of living beings that were similar to his cultivation level. This living being in front of him was actually able to maintain such an obvious intelligence under the effect of this whirlpool. So this living being was actually so outstanding. Even thinking about it for a moment, he was indescribably shocked. Ever since the surroundings returned to normal, Luo Fan felt that his senses and memories of Divine Son T had become clearer. The various thoughts of Divine Son T, his various guesses, and even his occasional battle experience with Tion Hunzi in this space-time flashed before his eyes. As a result, he now had a relatively complete understanding of space-time, and he also had a deeper understanding of the state that the Divine Son in front of him was in. The forbidden area of the Devil Realm, a powerful living being, a passageway to strip away its intelligence. It seems that the Devil Realm isn't just a place of enlightenment given by a saint like I thought before, Luo Fan thought to himself. His desire to enter the Devil Realm became even stronger. Roar! The 30-meter-tall humanoid creature finally could not take it anymore. It roared and directly tore the void apart. It left intermittent afterimages in the void as it pounced towards Divine Son T and Tion Hunzi. As soon as Luo Fan saw how fast it was pouncing towards him, he knew that it indeed had scruples and was much more restrained. Luo Fan could tell that Divine Son T and Tion Hunzi were clearly aware of it as well. In an instant, the two of them looked at each other and let out a soft cry. Their powers erupted wildly, and their auras suddenly fused together, forming an unimaginable resonance. They formed a 30-meter-tall humanoid figure in the void. It was the same size as the humanoid that was pouncing towards them. It was obvious that it had been condensed specifically to deal with this living being. Divine Son of Body cultivated the Tao of the fleshly body, while Tion Hun cultivated the Tao of the soul. The two of them reinforced and restrained each other. When combined, they contained the two most important elements of a normal living being. Divine Son T and Tion Hunzi had already discovered this during the long battle in the space-time. They had also created a mysterious joint attack technique, combining their ways of cultivation together to form a combat power that was even more powerful than the two of them combined. After Divine Son T and Tion Hunzi's auras intertwined to form the giant, their powers began to boil wildly. They constantly rushed out of their bodies and into the giant humanoid figure, causing it to gradually break away from its aura form. It became more and more realistic and obvious. Divine Son Ti's power was the power of vital energy. It directly formed the giant humanoid figure's powerful body, causing it to gradually radiate the vital energy that only living beings possessed. On the other hand, Tion Hunzi's power was the power of the soul. It directly formed the soul of the giant humanoid figure, causing it to emit an indescribable sense of spirituality. It gradually became like a real living being. It was unimaginable that it was just a phantom formed from the condensed aura. Divine Sun T and Tion Hunzi were close to the center of the vortex. Although the vortex was only hundreds of thousands of miles wide, existences like Divine Sun T and Tion Hunzi could walk from the center to the edge in an instant. However, because it was filled with an extremely dense and strange existence, the giant humanoid figure could not walk in a straight line. That was why that powerful creature with a rough face couldn't walk in a straight line. It could only walk in circles, following the direction of the whirlpool. It tried its best to approach the strange spot where Divine Sun T and Tion Hunzi were. Because of this detour, even though Tion Hunzi and T-God had done so many things, the 30-meter-tall creature still hadn't gotten close to them. It didn't really attack them either. Attack! Divine Sun T made a prompt decision and roared. Tion Hunzi did not hesitate at all. Without any hesitation, he and the Divine Sun of T activated their powers together. The huge human figure that had formed around them shook violently and separated from the two of them. It was as if it had become a real human being. It stepped out of the strange spot and moved in a straight line towards the second zone of the powerful humanoid figure that was circling around Divine Sun T and Tion Hunzi. The giant that Divine Sun T and Tion Hunzi had condensed was extremely powerful. According to the cultivation realm of cultivators, it was at least a cultivator who had stepped onto the second level. The aura that such a powerful existence gave off was naturally quite terrifying. If it was in the outside world, it would be enough to form a world of aura. It could even give birth to real life and all sorts of great civilizations. However, in this place, in this vortex, the aura he emitted was unable to leave his body. It could only exist on the surface of his body like armor. There was no need to talk about his aura leaving the world. Even more strange phenomena couldn't appear. From this, it could be seen how terrifying the aura emitted by the vortex was. At that moment, the gods and Tion Hun's wills had almost fused together, fusing with the powerful living beings they had formed. It felt as if their wills were on par with the spiritual intelligence of the living beings they had formed. They could control everything about the creature perfectly. They could control the creature to erupt with shocking combat power. At this time, Luo Fan did not let go of this opportunity. He also completely synchronized his senses with the Divine Sun of T. All the senses, thoughts, and actions of the Divine Sun of T felt exactly the same as his own. After synchronizing all these, Luo Fan instantly felt an unimaginable power. Although he could now defeat existences that had stepped onto a few levels, his cultivation realm was only at the profound down master realm. The realm and power of the powerful creature in front of him that had stepped onto the second level was already unprecedentedly powerful for him. Sensing such powerful power in such a high realm, he could not help but feel relaxed and happy. In a trance, he almost felt how wonderful it would be if he could continue like this forever. Of course, it was obvious that with his cultivation of the Taoist heart, it was impossible for him to really indulge in it. He could only feel the experience of a higher realm and try hard to find the direction of his future cultivation. He tried hard to find the steps that he needed to take to step onto this realm in the future. Unfortunately, although this creature had that kind of power and that kind of realm, it did not truly cultivate step by step. Luo Fan used it to find his own direction. Although it could not be said that he did not gain anything, it was still a lot less than what he had expected. The help it could provide him was much worse than what he had imagined. While Luo Fan was feeling the mystery of the creature, it had already crossed a distance of tens of thousands of miles and directly arrived near the giant that was rushing over in a spiral. It raised its fist and threw a punch at the giant. The giant was extremely furious and let out a roar. The word despicable seemed to be mixed in that roar. However, it did not dare to use its strongest power and could only raise its hand to block the punch. A loud cracking sound rang out. The moment the two large hands came into contact, the space around them shook violently. There seemed to be countless tiny cracks appearing where the two hands came into contact. Luo Fan could even see an extremely wild world behind those cracks with the help of the creature's eyes. Although they were fighting above the vortex and did not sink into it, the impact still spread to the vortex below, causing the vortex's trajectory to become slightly chaotic. And this chaos caused the dense aura emitted by the vortex to create slight chaos in that area. This chaos affected the creature formed by the fusion of the Divine Sun and the Heavenly Soul Sun's power. It caused the aura that only existed 3 inches above the surface of its body to become slightly chaotic, and some parts of it became extremely thin. Some parts of it became even thicker by a few inches. However, that was all. It did not really cause any harm to the creature. However, the chaotic aura was not enough to affect the other 30-meter-tall creature. The impact would be huge. At that moment, the creature's entire body seemed to sink uncontrollably, as if it was going to be pulled into the vortex and become a part of it. The creature seemed to feel unimaginable pain at that moment and let out an extremely shrill roar. His entire body struggled fiercely, and he restrained his own aura to the extreme. His original aura had already disappeared without a trace, and he looked like an ordinary giant without any strength at all. Looks like the source of this aura has a greater impact on him than I imagined, Heavenly Soul Sun suddenly said. This voice came directly from the giant's mouth. Tian Hun's voice came directly from the giant's mouth. At this moment, his and Divine Sun Ti's wills were fused with the creature, so Tian Hun's words naturally came from the giant's mouth. In that case, there seems to be no point in fighting at all. The Divine Sun of Ti's voice came from the giant's mouth. At that moment, Luo Fan's perception was connected with the Divine Sun of Ti's, so he clearly knew that the Divine Sun of Ti's words were absolutely sincere. The Divine Son of Ti was not a battle maniac like the Mad Fighter. However, what he cultivated was the Tao of the fleshly body. In order to temper and grow his fleshly body, fighting was an extremely effective method. Therefore, he was also extremely looking forward to fighting and even enjoyed it. Under such circumstances, the Divine Son of Ti and the Divine Son of Ti were naturally very much looking forward to the battle. At that moment, he saw that the battle that he originally thought would be extremely intense might not be able to be enjoyed to the fullest. Of course, he felt rather disappointed. Looks like that's the case. However, this is still better than being chased to the point where there's nowhere for us to escape. Heavenly Soul Sun's laughter came from the giant's mouth, but it seemed rather strange. That makes sense. Although it's not very interesting, we still have to eliminate him here. Otherwise, we won't be able to escape with our own strength, the Divine Son of Ti said. His words were not without reason. If the Divine Son of Ti and Ti let this powerful creature go because they felt that there was no point in fighting here, then given the creature's stubbornness, it definitely wouldn't let the two of them go. Even if it couldn't chase into the vortex and eliminate the two of them who were hiding near the center of the vortex, it would definitely guard outside the vortex. At that point, unless the two of them were willing to continue cultivating here until they could surpass this creature, they could only use their own trump cards to escape. However, that was clearly not what the two of them were willing to do. Therefore, they could only choose to eliminate this creature here. After the two of them reached an agreement, they did not hesitate to control the power around the giant's body. The giant formed a strange seal with both hands, and there seemed to be some kind of strange, destructive power condensing out of thin air, condensing on the seal. As the seal turned into an extremely complicated and solid giant hammer, it followed the direction of the seal and directly smashed towards the creature that was trying its best to resist the power of the vortex below. The giant hammer's power was endless. Even though it was only moving in the air, it already created a shocking sound. It felt as if hundreds of millions of mountains had condensed in one place and were smashing towards its target. Although there were no signs of changes in time and space, it seemed to be a phenomenon where things would move in the opposite direction when they reached an extreme. It was as if the terror of the giant hammer had already surpassed the limits of what time and space could reflect. And it wasn't that the giant hammer couldn't affect time and space. Just this strike alone caused the vortex below to slightly cave in, causing a pit to appear in the area where the huge hammer was facing. This pit caused the bizarre existence below to form a small, faint vortex around the pit, a vortex in the middle of the vortex. This change was more than 100 times more intense than the local changes in the vortex caused by the impact from before. The local aura fluctuations were also much stronger than before. Vaguely, the pulling force on the creature increased by several tens of times. The creature, who was struggling a little before, began to sink uncontrollably towards the whirlpool formed by the strange existences below. In the blink of an eye, it was about to be sucked into the whirlpool below. Perhaps it was due to the stimulation of the life and death crisis or something else, but the originally weak intelligence in the creature's eyes suddenly surged. In an instant, it was so strong that it was even clearer and denser than ordinary creatures. His body shook, as if he had broken free of some kind of shackles. He suddenly stopped in midair, and the terrifying pulling force of the whirlpool below seemed to have completely disappeared at this moment. Destroy! A calm but dignified voice came out of the giant's mouth. Next, the space within hundreds of kilometers instantly collapsed. Chapter 11:14. The giant formed by Tian Hun Zi and Divine Body Z's power also suffered great damage at that moment. It was badly battered and covered in blood. It seemed to be in an extremely sorry state. Is this his true strength? The giant let out a horrified roar. This voice was the voice of the divine son of Ti. It's just the final radiance of a setting sun. Look at what it looks like now. The giant spat out such a voice again. This time, it was Tian Hunzi's voice. Ti Divine Son received Tian Hunzi's reminder and looked at the giant that launched the terrifying attack. At that moment, the incomparably strong spiritual intelligence in the giant's eyes had already dimmed. In fact, it seemed to be even weaker than it was at the beginning. It had almost fallen to the level of the other living beings in this space-time. With such a change, even an ordinary person could tell that the previous eruption had caused him to pay a terrible price. Although the giant's spiritual intelligence had been greatly weakened due to the previous eruption, his battle instincts and the power of his divine ability were still there. Although he couldn't clearly analyze the situation, he instinctively knew what choice was the most beneficial for him. After struggling to break free from the terrifying suction of the huge vortex below, he didn't attack the giant formed by Ti Divine Son and Tian Hunzi's power. He also didn't attack where Ti Divine Son and Tian Hunzi were. Instead, he changed his direction and madly rushed out of the vortex. This speed was much faster than the speed at which they were advancing towards Divine Son Ti and Tian Hunzi. He escaped. Ti Divine Son was stunned for a moment before he suddenly reacted. He roared, "In your dreams." Then, he and Tian Hunzi controlled the giant and chased after him. At the same time, his power erupted and once again condensed a giant hammer that could collapse space-time. He smashed it towards the escaping giant. Although the giant left in a spiral, his speed was unimaginably fast. If Ti Divine Son and Tian Hunzi wanted to attack him, they could only follow behind him. They followed closely beside the giant. Only then could they attack him at any time. Therefore, although the giant could only take detours, Ti Divine Son and Tian Hunzi could control the giant to walk in a straight line. At this moment, they could only control the giant to take detours. Therefore, the two giants began to spiral around the vortex, trying to get out. The giant's speed was extremely fast, although he couldn't completely unleash his power. However, he was a terrifying existence who had already set foot on the fourth stage. As he focused on defense, even though the giants controlled by Divine Son Ti and Tian Hun tore up pieces of space-time and attacked him crazily. However, it didn't have much of an effect on him. In fact, the giant hammer had stirred up the vortex, causing the aura of the vortex to change and the pulling force to increase. However, because the giant was too fast, it had already left the area of effect before the pulling force could affect it, so it did not have much effect. That won't do. Divine Sun T frowned. Since the giant was focused on defense and running away, it was impossible for them to finish it off before it left the vortex. If he were to leave this whirlpool, the situation would turn around instantly. At that time, the only thing waiting for the two of them would be to use one of the trump cards given by the saint. Since direct attacks don't work, let's use another method, said Tion Hunzi. The tacit understanding between Divine Sun T and Tion Hun had been established through hundreds of thousands of years of fighting together. Although Tion Hun didn't say everything clearly, Divine Sun T completely understood what Tion Hun was trying to say. Overjoyed, he said, "We should have done that long ago." Tion Hun sighed. "It's not like you don't know how dangerous this is. The reason why we're safe right now is because of the characteristics of the operating rules of this whirlpool. If we do that, we might change the operating rules of this whirlpool and make this place unsafe." Divine Sun T knew that what Tion Hun said made sense, but he still said firmly, "We can't care about that now." The conversation between the two of them was not through the giant's mouth that was condensed from their power, but through their actual bodies. Therefore, the giant didn't seem very strange this time. Luo Fan heard their conversation with the help of Divine Sun Ti's senses. He couldn't help but feel helpless. He naturally knew what the two of them were talking about. In fact, he had thought of this method before the two of them did. However, he was still rather helpless when the two of them really wanted to do it. If the operating rules of this whirlpool changed, this place would no longer be safe. This might be dangerous for Divine Sun T and Tion Hun, but it wouldn't be too powerful. They still had enough time and means to avoid this danger. In the end, they might not even need to use the trump card given to them by the saints to get out of danger. However, the situation was different for Luo Fan. The reason why he could sense everything in the outside world with the help of Divine Sun Ti's senses was like when he was on Earth or in other dojos. This was because the operating rules of this whirlpool were extremely mysterious, causing things to move in the opposite direction. This allowed him to sense the outside world in a place where the aura of the demon realm was many times denser than in the outside world. In this way, if the operating rules of this whirlpool changed, he was certain that he wouldn't be able to continue sensing the outside world. Instead, he would fall into the same state as when Divine Sun T was in the demon realm. His perception of the outside world would be completely chaotic, and he wouldn't be able to obtain any meaningful information at all. Unless Divine Sun T found the place that caused things to move in the opposite direction again, he wouldn't be able to achieve this state again. What Luo Fan saw was only the memories of Divine Sun T. These things had already happened, and the outcome had already been determined. However, it wouldn't change because of Luo Fan's will. Therefore, Divine Sun T and Tion Hun quickly controlled the giant, formed by their power to unleash their own power, changing the direction of the giant hammer in a frenzy. They bombarded the strange existence in the whirlpool in a frenzy. Although the giant hammer had also caused changes to the strange existence in the whirlpool, that was only the impact of the aftermath. It was just the damage caused by the aftermath of the giant hammer attacking the giant. This was a completely different concept from completely blasting the power into the strange existence at this moment. The strength of the whirlpool's turbulence was completely incomparable. At that moment, the strange existence around the giant went berserk. The originally rather orderly aura emitted by the whirlpool instantly became extremely chaotic in the area where the two giants were. The aura was chaotic. To the giant on the fourth step, it was truly a fatal influence. Although a furious expression appeared on his face and he roared crazily, he didn't dare to stop at all. At the critical moment, he found a tiny gap in that extremely chaotic aura. He took a detour through the chaotic aura in all directions. Moreover, because of the chaotic aura, he no longer needed to go around in circles like before. Instead, it followed an outward direction and directly rushed from the whirlpool to the outer circle. However, it forcefully turned a bad thing into a good thing and reduced the distance of the whirlpool by one circle. Both Divine Sun T and Tion Hun had already expected such a reaction from the giant. They didn't have any extravagant hopes that this expert, who had already suffered once, would fall for the same trick again and be pulled to the point where he was almost unable to escape. They had disrupted the whirlpool around the giant just to slow him down. Next, they controlled the giant to expand crazily. In the blink of an eye, it grew from its original height of 30 meters to 30 kilometers. At the same time, as they grew larger, the giant hammers in their hands also grew to match the size of the giant's body. They grew to a size that matched the height of 30 kilometers. The degree of shock skyrocketed by many times. This giant was only formed by the power of Divine Sun Ti and Tianhun. Its size was naturally a matter of thought from Divine Sun Ti and Tianhun. Under such circumstances, Divine Sun Ti and Tianhun could naturally grow as big as they wanted it to be. The reason why it became 30 meters tall before was because their opponents were 30 meters tall. If their opponents were 30 meters tall, it would be shocking if the giant was 30 kilometers tall. However, it would be very inconvenient for them to face the enemy. If one's body was much larger than the opponent's, and their power remained the same, it would be equivalent to increasing the area of one's weakness. As a result, it would be easier for the opponent to take advantage of it, and they would suffer instead. However, the situation was different at the moment. At that moment, Divine Sun Ti and Tianhun wanted to disrupt the whirlpool as much as possible, making the aura of the whirlpool even more chaotic so that the suction force of the whirlpool on the giant would be even more irresistible. Of course, the bigger the giant, the better. It was like stirring up a pot of calm water with something of the same weight. Of course, the smaller the density, the bigger the volume, the more chaotic it would be. After growing bigger, they did not hesitate at all. They controlled the giant to swing the hammers that were thousands of times larger, leaving behind a series of afterimages. The hammers circled around the giant and crazily smashed towards the strange existence that formed the whirlpool below. Although the goal was not to attack, in order to prevent the opponent from blocking the hammers with their bodies, the hammers were imbued with unimaginable power. Every hammer strike had the power to destroy space and time. Apart from the whirlpool becoming more and more chaotic, the space and time above the whirlpool also shattered, turning into long, large traces of gray fog that lingered in the air for a long time. Although the whirlpool was extremely huge and its diameter was calculated in thousands of kilometers, it was so intricate and had such a mysterious effect. It naturally meant that the rules of operation of the whirlpool were extremely complicated and precise. The giants formed by Divine Sun Ti and Tianhun were only 30 meters tall. Even if they destroyed the whirlpool, it would only be like a mosquito biting an elephant. It would not affect the whirlpool much, nor would it affect the rules of operation of the whirlpool. However, at this moment, the giants that destroyed the whirlpool had already become 30 kilometers tall. They had grown by more than 1,000 times, and they were no longer just affecting the whirlpool with their aftershocks. Instead, they were specifically attacking the whirlpool. The effect was no longer like a mosquito biting an elephant, but a wasp stinging a person. In the blink of an eye, the turbulence from where the two giants were located began to spread like dominoes, spreading its influence to the entire huge whirlpool. Gradually, the rules of operation of the whirlpool began to change slightly. Furthermore, the changes did not even stabilize immediately. Instead, they seemed to be shaking and changing rapidly. The degree of chaos made it difficult to grasp the rules of the changes. Fortunately, the changes became relatively weak when they reached the center of the whirlpool. Although there was some effect on the strange point, it only caused the boundary of the point to constantly change shape. However, it did not cause the strange point to move. Fortunately, that was the case. Otherwise, Luo Fan would have been directly expelled by the battle and would not have been able to sense his surroundings. The area around the 30 meters tall giant was the center of the changes, so it was naturally the place where the changes were the most intense. At this moment, his aura had already become extremely chaotic. Even with his reflexes and perception ability, he was still able to sense it. There was no way he could find a real path to safely escape from this dangerous position. The giant was furious. and the intelligence in his eyes condensed again. However, it didn't condense to the point where it could directly destroy the giant hammer like before. Instead, it only condensed a slightly stronger intelligence than normal. This kind of intelligence allowed it to carry out a considerable degree of thinking and judgment, but it was not enough for it to display a remarkable divine ability like before to reverse the situation. Then let's die together. The giant quickly recognized the current situation. The tiny bit of intelligence in its eyes turned into indescribable despair. It roared in a muffled voice. Then, its body suddenly shook and it grew to a height of tens of thousands of meters. It turned into a giant that was the same size as the giant formed by Sun God and Sun Tianhunzi. This was clearly a divine ability similar to the world of Dharma phenomenon. Generally speaking, it was extremely easy for cultivators who had achieved the immortal Tao to enlarge their bodies. Moreover, this creature had surpassed the Khanate Grand Luo realm and the Sage-to-Be realm, and had set foot on the fourth step of the 9 great steps below the Sage realm. Such a transformation was truly something that could be accomplished with a single thought. Looks like his intelligence is really too simple. He actually wants to drag our clones down with him. The divine son of Ti couldn't help but be stunned when he saw the giant's transformation. He then laughed. After the giant, whose eyes were filled with despair, grew to a height of 100,000 feet, it pounced towards the giant that was formed by the gods and Tianhunzi's powers. It completely disregarded the terrifying suction force from the vortex that had suddenly increased by thousands of times. It abruptly clasped its hands together and tightly hugged the other giant. The terrifying suction force of the whirlpool passed through the giant's body and directly transferred to the other 2 giants, causing them to sink down like a rock. "Oh no, our wills have been sealed," Tianhunzi suddenly roared. This time, the voice did not come from the mouth of his body, but from the mouth of the giant who was being carried into the whirlpool. At this moment, the bodies of the divine son of Ti and Tianhunzi, who were close to the strange point at the center of the whirlpool, instantly underwent an inexplicable change. They seemed to have lost their vitality and turned into 2 people in a vegetative state. The divine son of Ti's horrified voice came from the giant's mouth. "This is a curse. How can there be such a powerful curse? This is simply the law of the great Tao." As the 2 of them roared in disbelief, the 2 giants that were 30 kilometers tall sank into the strange existence that formed the whirlpool below. As they sank into the vortex, the chaos above the vortex gradually calmed down due to the fact that it had lost its source. Slowly, it returned to its original appearance. It was still an extremely calm, vast vortex that spat out strange creatures from the center of the vortex from time to time. Apart from the 2 cultivators that seemed to be in a vegetative state, floating at the strange point at the center, it didn't look much different from before the divine son of Ti and Tianhunzi arrived. So this is the result. Suddenly, one of the 2 cultivators that seemed to be in a vegetative state trembled slightly. An inexplicable smile appeared on his face as he murmured, "I didn't expect that creature to have such a strange curse ability." It directly used the connection between the incarnation and the original body to completely pull the original body's will into the incarnation, allowing the original body to sync together with the incarnation. "How strange," the person murmured. The body that spoke was, of course, the body of the divine son of Ti. The person who spoke was, of course, Luo Fan. Chapter 11:15. The memory function of any living being would not be limited to the brain, nor would it be limited to the spirit or the soul. Even the body of an ordinary living being had the ability to remember, let alone a cultivator that far surpassed ordinary living beings. However, the memory ability of an ordinary living being was worlds apart from that of the brain, the soul, and the spirit. At most, it could only remember simple memories such as living habits, activity habits, and combat habits. Compared to ordinary living creatures, cultivators' memory capacity was greatly expanded. Not only could they remember simple habits like ordinary living creatures, but they could also be like the brains of living creatures, able to remember all the complicated encounters they had. At this moment, Luo Fan was immersed in the memory of the divine son of Ti's body. Because of this, he could still exist in the body of the divine son of Ti's and Tian Hun's bodies when they were sealed in their clones, instead of being sealed in their clones. Luo Fan carefully observed his surroundings, a faint smile appearing on his face. With a slight thought, he lifted his foot and took a step forward. In an instant, he had already crossed the strange point. He arrived at the vortex formed by the strange existence. Unfortunately, even though he was here, he did not feel much different from when he was in the strange point. The extremely rich aura that belonged to the demon realm was still the same as before. He did not feel the influence of the unimaginably terrifying aura outside of that point at all. Luo Fan thought to himself, I knew it. At this moment, he was relying on the memory of the divine son of Ti's body. Back then, the divine son of Ti's body was completely standing on the strange point without moving at all when this memory happened. Under such circumstances, the aura that this body remembered during this period of time was, of course, completely the aura of that strange point. The reason why the divine son of Ti's body was motionless during this period of time, while Luo Fan was able to control the divine son of Ti's body to wander around, was even simpler. It was equivalent to Luo Fan wandering in the memory of the son of God of Ti. It was equivalent to wandering around in a huge three-dimensional painting. What he saw and heard was actually based on the memory of the son of God of Ti during this period of time, combined with the change of his position. It was also for this reason. At this moment, Luo Fan was able to leave the point where things would move in the opposite direction after reaching an extreme. He could still sense the situation in the outside world, unlike the space-time outside the vortex, where his senses were almost completely isolated. Luo Fan had guessed this before, which was why he dared to step out of that strange spot. It's really a rare opportunity, Luo Fan thought. He turned around and headed towards the center of the vortex, where strange creatures were being spat out from time to time. His speed was naturally quite astonishing. Very soon, he floated above the center of the vortex. Whether it was the aura in the center of the vortex or the strange creatures that occasionally spat out from the center of the vortex, they seemed to be non-existent to Luo Fan. They could not affect him in the slightest. Even if those strange creatures seemed to collide with him, they were just shadows. They directly passed through his body and did not affect him at all. This was just the memory of the son of God of Ti. It was not much different from a holographic image, so it was normal for it to have such a performance. Luo Fan controlled the body of the son of God of Ti to slowly sink down. After a while, his figure directly stood in the center of the vortex. He raised his head and looked in all directions, and an indescribable shock rose from his heart. Although this was only the perspective of the memory recorded in the body of the son of God of Ti, this change of perspective had already revealed some of the mysteries of the vortex. This was a huge vortex. From this angle, one could vaguely see a strange, illusory outline rotating around the vortex. It was as if the strange, illusory outline had rotated the strange existence that was originally calm, giving the vortex a rotating force that allowed it to exist for a long time. The strange, illusory outline was extremely strange. It was faintly discernible, and it was impossible to see or distinguish it from other angles. Only by looking at it from the angle of the center of the vortex could one deduce its existence through the overall operating rules of the vortex and the subtle changes in the entire vortex. What exactly formed this vortex? Luo Fan was secretly shocked. The aura produced by this vortex was something that even powerful creatures that had set foot on the fourth step could not resist. After being pulled into it, they would even despair and want to perish together with their opponents. One could imagine how terrifying it was. However, such a vortex was actually formed by the stirring of some kind of existence. It went without saying how powerful this existence was. How could he not be shocked? Luo Fan looked around, and his mind gradually reconstructed the details of the vortex's rotation bit by bit. This caused a strange vortex that was almost identical to the huge vortex in the outside world to form in his mind. The only difference was that there was a huge difference in size. When the whirlpool appeared, Luo Fan felt an inexplicable power being generated from the whirlpool. His countless strange thoughts were uncontrollably pulled by an indescribable force from the bottom of the whirlpool and were thrown into the whirlpool. As the whirlpool rotated, they began to quickly condense towards the center of the whirlpool. Finally, they condensed at the center of the whirlpool in the blink of an eye and were completely cleansed by an incredible power. They became crystal clear, pure, and flawless. They directly passed through the center of the whirlpool and were suddenly spat out from the front of the whirlpool. They directly rushed out of his mind, almost breaking through the barrier of his mind and leaving his body. Just by simulating the operating rules of this whirlpool, it already has such an incredible effect. The person who arranged this whirlpool is truly formidable. Luo Fan was secretly surprised. Every single one of his thoughts was extremely tough and extremely stable. It was extremely stable. Normally speaking, if it left his body, it could even turn into a complete illusory creature, existing for tens of thousands of years before it could be calculated clearly. However, at this moment, without his control, the simulated vortex directly pulled many of his thoughts into the vortex. It completely wiped out all the will and information attached to them, making them pure again. However, this is a good way to get rid of distracting thoughts. If I create a cultivation method according to the operating rules of this vortex, it should be very beneficial to the cultivator's cultivation. Luo Fan suddenly had a thought, and a rather complicated cultivation method flowed through his mind. However, this cultivation method was quickly placed in the depths of his memory. After all, he had to get rid of distracting thoughts. He had to make his mind pure. He did not know when he would be able to do this easily. Although a cultivation method that could get rid of distracting thoughts was extremely precious to ordinary cultivators, it was not very useful to him. However, it was not of much use to him. In this way, he could create such a method out of interest, but he would not keep it in his mind for too long and waste his energy. Just as the whirlpool began to cleanse his mind, the whirlpool seemed to have been activated. There seemed to be a strange hand stirring and spinning within the whirlpool. The hand occupied 1/10 of the vortex, and it was only moving in a circular motion near the center of the vortex. It did not spread out according to the vortex at all. 1/10 of the size of a hand. Luo Fan looked up at the real vortex and mumbled. A hand that occupied 1/10 of the size was naturally not much when placed on the vortex in his mind. However, when placed on the real vortex, its size was rather terrifying. Perhaps the power incarnation formed by the combination of the power of the Divine Sun and the power of the Son of Heaven Soul was only as big as the difference between an ant and the power incarnation. Such a huge, invisible hand was hidden in an indescribable and subtle way, acting on the vortex. This made Luo Fan even more interested in the mystery behind the vortex. Luo Fan understood that the simulation of the vortex in his mind was still very incomplete. The real vortex could break the barrier between the demon realm and the Taoist field, and it could even erase the intelligence of a peak sage-to-be. On the other hand, the vortex that he simulated could only affect thoughts. It did not have the power to break the barrier of time and space, nor could it affect a more powerful entity. The difference was obvious at a glance. Unfortunately, this is only the memory of the Divine Sun. If I could enter the vortex and explore it, I would definitely gain more. As Luo Fan thought about this, he could not help but feel helpless. He dispersed the strange vortex in his mind. Although this was what he thought, he did not give up. With Wei Dong in mind, he continued to sink and gradually sank into the strange existence that formed the vortex. It was still as if he had sunk into a shadow. It felt as if this strange existence did not exist, but it made him feel extremely strange. When his head completely sank into the strange existence below, the world in his eyes changed again. His surroundings had become a boundless expanse of gray. Although he knew that the surface of the vortex was less than an inch above his head, even if he raised his head, all he could see was a boundless expanse of gray. Apart from that, there was nothing else unusual. What's going on? Luo Fan was shocked. This situation was out of his expectations. It must be known that at this moment, although he seemed to be controlling the Divine Sun's body to wander around and explore, the Divine Sun was still standing on the strange point near the center of the vortex. Therefore, even if he walked around, it was equivalent to changing the perspective of the scene recorded by the Divine Sun's body at that point. In essence, it was still the world he saw at that point. Under such circumstances, when Luo Fan controlled the Divine Sun's body to enter the vortex, the scene he saw should be no different from the outside world. It should only be equivalent to changing the perspective. How could it be like this, as if he had fallen into the gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos? Time, space, matter, and energy seemed to be in a mess. Although the information that Luo Fan sensed was still the same as before, he had already discovered the strangeness of the strange existence around him. Could this really be the gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos? Luo Fan could not help but suspect. The surrounding gray haze was too similar to the appearance in the gap, which made him have such doubts. The surrounding dusky scene was too similar to the scene in the gap, causing him to have such suspicions. When he thought of this, Luo Fan could not help but be secretly shocked. If this was really the gap between heaven and earth and chaos, wouldn't his body be in great trouble? Luo Fan's real body was at a point in time billions of trillions of years after the shattering of the Earth's universe, and his current location was in the gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos. This was the greatest guarantee of his own safety. The reason why he believed that this was what he was relying on was because of his knowledge. Since ancient times, the gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos had never been touched by any cultivator. Aside from the sages, no other cultivators would be able to discover him. However, if this was really the gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos at this moment, that meant that his previous understanding was completely wrong. Since ancient times, he was not the only one who could touch this gap. This meant that what he thought was safe was not as stable as he thought. He was in that gap. There were still cultivators who could find him. How could he not be horrified by this? Looks like I have to make a trip here, personally. I'm observing from the memories of the Divine Son of T, but I can't confirm if this is the gap just by looking at it. In an instant, Luo Fan had already made a decision. The memories of the Divine Son of T were recorded billions of years ago. He did not know if this space still existed after such a long time. However, regardless of whether it existed or not, Luo Fan had to make this trip because it was related to the safety of his real body. It would be better if it existed, but even if it didn't, he had to see the ruins here. As he thought to himself, Luo Fan carefully observed his surroundings. He wanted to obtain as much information as possible about this place from the memories of the Divine Son of T, so that when he came here personally in the future, he would be able to take fewer detours and see the mysteries of this place clearly. When he observed his surroundings with a more rigorous gaze and carefully sensed the various things around him, he understood why the scene he saw after stepping into this place had changed so much. It turned out that it was still the effects of the operating rules of the vortex. The vortex was merely simulated in his mind, yet it already possessed such unimaginable power. It could cleanse his thoughts and make them pure and flawless again. This meant that the operating rules of the vortex contained unimaginable power just by observing it from this point of view. Under such circumstances, when Luo Fan controlled the Divine Son of Ti's body to enter the vortex, it was equivalent to changing his perspective into the vortex. The additional power of the vortex naturally took effect, directly affecting the Divine Son of Ti's vision, causing his vision to change accordingly. This change was extremely subtle and mysterious. It was a kind of cleansing of one's mind, thoughts, perception, and vision. With all these effects combined together, it created the current situation. Although Luo Fan had only changed his perspective, he found that he seemed to have fallen into another world. From the looks of it, The possibility of this being the gap between the world and the state of chaos has been greatly reduced. Luo Fan could not help but secretly sigh in relief after realizing this. Of course, although he was relieved, he did not change his mind. He still wanted to come here and personally study the vortex with his real body. After all, although the possibility was greatly reduced, it was not impossible, since he had already formed such a thought and doubt. If he did not have absolute evidence to shatter this doubt, it would definitely leave some traces in his heart. From then on, it would make it difficult for his heart to truly calm down. In the end, it would affect his cultivation, even if it was only a small amount. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, Luo Fan memorized the changes in his vision even more meticulously. Combined with what he had previously memorized, he began to deduce the mysteries contained in the operation of the vortex based on his own knowledge. Through this deduction, he constantly adjusted the operation of the vortex that he had memorized. He memorized the operation of the vortex through the memory of the Divine Son of Ti's body, and the memory of the Divine Son of Ti's body came from the strange point near the center of the vortex. Under such circumstances, the operation of the vortex that Luo Fan had memorized naturally had some differences with the operation of the real vortex. These differences might not matter in other places, but they were extremely important in such a delicate and strange vortex that could affect the intelligence of a peak quasi-sage. If Luo Fan couldn't reduce or even eliminate these errors as much as possible, then when he personally came to this whirlpool in the future, it might cause unimaginable consequences because of such a small error, and it might even affect his life. Let alone Luo Fan. No living being with any sense could accept such a tragic outcome. Chapter 11:16. Just like that, Luo Fan comprehended the mysteries of the vortex according to the memories of the Divine Son of Ti's body. The more he comprehended, the more he felt that it contained unfathomable mysteries, and the more he felt that the true vortex contained mysteries that would be of great benefit to his cultivation. He became more and more interested in going there himself. After an unknown amount of time, Luo Fan moved his mind and controlled the body of the divine child to rush up. In the blink of an eye, he rushed out of the vortex and returned to the top of the grand vortex. He took a light step and directly brought the Divine Son of Ti's body back to the strange point near the center of the vortex. He stood still and completely restored the Divine Son of Ti's body to its original state before he controlled it. Just as he finished doing all this, the whirlpool suddenly began to produce Julie's rampage. Small whirlpools appeared one after another in various locations of the whirlpool. These small vortexes were densely packed, almost covering all parts of the huge vortex. This change directly shattered the huge vortex, causing the entire vortex's operating rules to become chaotic. The mysterious mystery that Luo Fan had sensed before, which was extremely beneficial to his cultivation realm, instantly disappeared. Following this change, the situation of the strange creatures spewing out from the center of the vortex also disappeared. In the blink of an eye, the mysterious vortex seemed to have turned into a muddy water. The change was so fast that even Luo Fan couldn't react. This change didn't stop there. There seemed to be an even more terrifying abnormality occurring inside the vortex. The number of small vortexes kept increasing, causing the already somewhat muddy vortex to become even more muddy. Luo Fan had already exited the state of controlling the Divine Son of Ti's body, but he could still use the Divine Son of Ti's body to observe the changes in the outside world. Seeing this, he secretly felt that it was a pity. It seems that this vortex won't be able to be preserved. What a pity, what a pity. With such a huge change, unless the existence that created the vortex reconstructed the vortex's operating rules again, the vortex itself would no longer have the ability to recover. From the looks of it, right now, it was unknown how many billions of years had passed since this moment in the Divine Son's memory. The possibility of the vortex still existing was extremely small, which disrupted his original plan. This made it difficult for him to come here and personally comprehend the mysteries of this whirlpool. How could not be a pity? He knew that there was a high chance that the whirlpool would be destroyed. Luo Fan's eyes shone as he tried his best to remember all the changes in the whirlpool. He began to simulate the changes that were happening to the whirlpool in his mind. Although the whirlpool was about to be destroyed, but this was the most intense kind of change. However, it was able to reflect the original mysteries of this vortex. If Luo Fan combined this scene with the mysteries that he had previously comprehended, he would definitely be able to gain a deeper understanding of the operating rules of this vortex. At this moment, the changes that were happening to the whirlpool were not fixed. Instead, they were happening all the time, and it was unknown how many billions of changes there were. As such, Luo Fan wanted to remember all the changes that were happening to the whirlpool. Although it did not exceed the limits of his ability, it still took up a lot of his mental energy, making him almost completely forget everything in the outside world. Even his perception of the passage of time became a little blurry. After an unknown amount of time, when the whirlpool finally completely turned into a paste, and all the tiny whirlpools were so dense that they could not even be seen as a whirlpool anymore, a huge skeleton climbed out of the paste with great difficulty. The skeleton was tens of thousands of feet tall, and there was not a single bit of flesh on it. Even the bones looked a little broken and were covered with countless cracks. It was obvious that it had reached its limit and had almost completely collapsed. That was close. After the skeleton climbed out with great difficulty, he opened his mouth and said, "This was the voice of the divine son of body." At this moment, Luo Fan once again sensed the will of the divine son of body. There were countless lights, shadows, and voices flashing in his mind. However, it was a pity that these lights and shadows were blurry and chaotic. The voices were only rumbling, and he could not tell what exactly they were. He could not tell if someone was speaking or if it was natural vibrations from the outside world. At this moment, Luo Fan knew that these were the memories of the divine son of body after he was sealed into the incarnation of power and pulled into the whirlpool below. This was because the divine son of bodies had already left the point where things would move in the opposite direction when they reached an extreme, and was once again affected by the extremely rich aura from the demon realm. Therefore, Luo Fan could not see or hear anything at all, just like how the divine son of body had been in the demon realm. Just as I thought, Luo Fan sighed helplessly. This was the divine son of body's memories. In these memories, Luo Fan could not see anything about the demon realm. Obviously, Luo Fan could not find any memories of the divine son of bodies about the demon realm in these memories. This was to be expected. Tian Hunzi's body trembled as he said, with lingering fear, "We were almost wiped out of our consciousness. Fortunately, we still have Master's imprint on us. Otherwise, we would definitely be like the other living beings in this space-time. We would become muddle-headed and like walking corpses." Just as Tian Hunzi's main body opened his mouth, the power clone collapsed and turned into two streams of power. One was the power of the soul, and the other was the power of the vital qi. With a sudden contraction, both of them entered the bodies of Tian Hunzi and the god, and the void became empty. Just a little bit more. However, if we don't leave now, what awaits us won't be as simple as wiping out our consciousness. We might even lose our lives here, said the divine son of body. At this moment, the vortex below, which had already turned into a paste, suddenly shook and started to slowly collapse. This caused Luo Fan to suddenly feel that the voices of the divine son of body and Tian Hunzi were getting further and further away from him. Meanwhile, everything that he could sense became even more chaotic. It was as if the world was gradually distorting and changing. This process of change was rather strange, but Luo Fan was extremely familiar with it. He could not help but sigh. It's happening again. Then, he completely lost his perception of the outside world. He could no longer observe anything in the outside world through the senses of the divine son of body. The only sounds he could hear also became a rumbling sound. He could not even tell if it was a human speaking or something else. In such a situation, it was obvious that the aura of the demon realm had finally taken effect and completely disrupted Luo Fan's perception. This made him feel like the divine son of body had entered the demon realm. He could not sense anything in the outside world at all. Even his sense of time had been completely lost. The reason for this was very simple. The vortex had completely lost its effect at this moment. Hence, the unique characteristics of the spot where the divine son of body was at, which allowed him to not be affected by the aura of the demon realm in the densest part of the demon realm, had naturally disappeared. As such, he naturally could not sense anything in the outside world anymore. After an unknown period of time, and also not knowing how the divine son of body and Tion Hunzi dealt with it, Luo Fan felt that the surrounding light and shadows had gradually returned to normal. The sounds he heard had also returned to normal. Looking around, he realized that the divine son of body and Tion Hunzi had already returned to Earth's universe. Surrounding them was boundless seawater, but below them was a lava flow. At this moment, both the divine son of body and Tion Hunzi looked very embarrassed. The divine son of body had even lost half of his body. The chi and blood in his body were almost as weak as when he had just become a quasi-sage. Compared to his cultivation of the great perfection of the quasi-sage realm, he was almost completely exhausted. Although the body of Tion Hunzi was very complete, Luo Fan could tell with one look that the divine son of body had lost half of his soul. At this moment, the weight of the divine son of body was not much different from that of the divine son of body. Who did that huge hand just now belong to? The divine son of body asked with a serious expression. It should be an expert from the demon realm. I don't know who it is exactly, Tion Hunzi said with an extremely pale face. His voice was very hoarse, and he seemed to have difficulty controlling the power in his body. Occasionally, the aura of a quasi-sage would be released from his body and shake the surrounding seawater. The lava flow below was the entrance to the Taoist field. Previously, there had been all sorts of strange lights and shadows above the lava flow. However, at this moment, the lava flow had become ordinary lava flow. There was nothing special about it all. It was as if the entrance to the Taoist field had completely disappeared. An expert from the demon realm? Is there such a powerful existence in the demon realm? In my opinion, that person is even more terrifying than my eldest senior brother. You should know that my eldest senior brother, Saint Chao, is a great existence who has set foot on the 9th platform. How could such a terrifying existence exist in the demon realm? The divine son of body's eyes flashed with even more astonishment. Even more terrifying than senior brother Chao? I don't think so. After all, senior brother Chao is your senior brother. How could he possibly reveal his full strength in front of you? The owner of that huge hand might be very powerful, but he might not be stronger than senior brother Chao, Tion Hunzi said. The divine son of body's expression softened a little when he heard this. You're right. He might not be stronger than eldest senior brother. However, such strength is still extremely terrifying. Is there really such a powerful existence in the demon realm? In just a short period of time, the divine son of bodies and Tion Hunzi's injuries had mostly healed. The half of the divine son of body's body that had disappeared had already completely recovered. However, his chi and blood were still a little weak and far from his peak state. As for Tion Hunzi's spirit, although it had not fully recovered, it had already reconstructed a complete outline. Its aura was still very weak, but at least on the surface, it did not seem much different from normal. When Tion Hunzi heard the divine son of body's doubts, he said with a slightly dazed expression, "No one knows exactly how powerful the demon realm is. At least, as far as I know, no one below the sage level knows exactly how powerful the demon realm is. However, anyone who truly understands the demon realm will know that it is much more powerful than anyone can imagine. Furthermore, it is much more powerful than anyone can imagine." The divine son of body frowned. Although he had entered the demon realm before, he had only been at the Khanate Zenith Heaven stage. He had not even entered the demi-sage stage. His strength was so weak that he could not show it off at all. With this kind of strength, even if he entered the demon world, all he could come into contact with and understand was only the lower end of the demon world. He had no idea how powerful the higher end of the demon world was. Therefore, when he heard Tion Hunzi describe the demon realm in such a way, he did not dare to believe it. That's a little too much. Could there be sages in the demon realm? The divine son of Body finally relaxed his brows. He shook his head and laughed. Obviously, he did not believe Tion Hunzi's description. As he said that, he felt that it was ridiculous, and a smile appeared on his face. However, when he looked at Tion Hunzi, he realized that Tion Hunzi looked very serious at the moment. He did not agree with what he said and did not intend to change his description at all. He just looked at him quietly. He did not say a word. The divine son of Body's heart skipped a beat when he saw Tion Hunzi's expression. At this moment, Luo Fan, who was attached to the divine son of Body's body, could not help but feel his heart skip a beat. Could it be that there really are sages in the demon realm? How is that possible? In this universe, since ancient times, even in the Dharma-ending era billions of years later, there have only been legends of the seven sages. This demon realm is just a world created by the sages. Although it is a little special, how could there be other sages? There were countless thoughts in Luo Fan's mind. It was extremely chaotic. While Luo Fan was like this, the divine son of Body's expression was not much better. His mouth gradually opened wide, and he looked at Tion Hunzi in disbelief. After a long time, he murmured, "Could it be that there really are sages in the demon realm?" "It can't be." Tion Hunzi nodded solemnly and said, "Don't doubt it. Although I don't know who spread it, it is said that there are indeed demon sages in the demon realm. Moreover, there is more than one." "You must be joking. I don't know who spread it. These speculations might just be delusions of cultivators. Since ancient times, there have only been 7 sages in our world for billions of years. How could a small world like the demon realm, which is attached to our world, give birth to a sage?" The divine son of Body said with a stiff smile, "I don't know who said it, but the people who spread it are our seniors. Do you think it's believable?" Tion Hunzi said. The seniors that Tion Hunzi spoke of were naturally the disciples of the sages before them. Obviously, as the disciples of the sages, it was impossible for them to speak carelessly. If they said there were sages in the demon realm, then it was very likely that there were. At this moment, the divine son of Body could no longer find any reason to refute Tion Hunzi's argument. For a moment, his face stiffened. Countless thoughts were in a mess in his mind, but he couldn't find out what exactly he was thinking about. What Tion Hunzi said at this moment had really overturned the views that he had formed in the past countless years. He couldn't accept it for a moment and felt that the whole world had become unreal. There are indeed incredible secrets in the demon realm, a world that was only used to store the residual power of the tribulation of heaven and earth actually gave birth to such a prosperous civilization and a sage. "I must go to the demon realm to take a look." Luo Fan, who was on the divine son of Body, completely heard Tion Hunzi's words. At this moment, he secretly made up his mind. After making the decision to go to the demon realm in the future, Luo Fan had another question. The sages of the demon realm, the sages of the earth universe. What's the secret behind this? Is the tribulation of heaven and earth really that simple? Back then, after he entered the Earth universe from the untainted world avatar, he deduced the Earth universe based on the evolution process of the untainted world. He thought that the Earth universe wanted to maintain its fragmented appearance and form the trend of the times so that the sages couldn't gather their true power to trigger the tribulation of heaven and earth again and cause the true destruction of the world. He had always thought that this view was correct, and he even used this view to analyze everything he had seen. However, after traveling through time and space to the Earth universe before it was fragmented, he increasingly felt that this view was probably not correct. He increasingly felt that the arguments that supported his view were too weak. In the past, due to his lack of knowledge, his estimation of the sages was not sufficient at all. Now that his cultivation realm had been raised to this level, he realized how terrifying the power of the sages' magical powers were. He then understood what it meant to be omnipotent, omniscient, and omniscient. With this increase in understanding, his previous argument that the sages who were created after the fragmentation of the world could not trigger the tribulation of heaven and earth again became insufficient. The power of the trend of the times was also constantly weakened by him during this process. Of course, when facing the sages, his understanding of the power of the trend of the times was still the same from an absolute point of view. He still thought that its power was unimaginably terrifying. However, he no longer thought that the trend of the times could really control the sages and make them avoid it. On top of that, after coming to the Earth universe before it was shattered, he learned about the existence of the demon realm. This once again refuted his idea that the Earth universe could not withstand the torment of the saints, and had no choice but to maintain its shattering state. Since the sages could retain the residual power of the tribulation of heaven and earth, and even open up a space-time to store this power, it was obvious that they had a considerable degree of ability to deal with the tribulation of heaven and earth. Chapter 11:17. Since the reason for the Earth's universe breaking was different from what he had thought, it could only mean that there were more and more complicated secrets involved. Maybe it has something to do with the sage of the Devil Realm. Although Luo Fan was already a profound Tao master and was only one step away from the exceptional Tao master, he was still not qualified to talk about things that involve the rise and fall of the entire perfect world and the secrets of the Sage Supreme. He could only rely on his own speculation to come to a conclusion. If he wanted to come to a firm conclusion, the result would be overturned by himself in the future, just like his previous speculation about the reason for the Earth's universe breaking. The divine son of Ti and Tian Hunzi were floating at the bottom of the sea at this time, facing the long lava flow below, each in deep thought. I want to choose a time to re-enter the Devil Realm. What's your plan, my friend? The divine son of Ti said to Tian Hunzi indifferently, which made Tian Hunzi's expression change greatly. Are you crazy? Tian Hunzi opened his mouth and directly said, Don't you know how dangerous the Devil Realm is? A disciple of a sage, like you entering, it is like a piece of fresh meat thrown into a group of sharks. Is it that dangerous? The divine son of Ti said indifferently. Although it seemed like he was saying something out of his expectations, his expression and attitude were completely the same as before. There was no difference at all. With one look, one could tell that these words were not enough to change his mind. Of course, you've been to the Devil Realm. Don't you know what kind of world it is? It's a world that is thousands of times crueler than our world. Although the cultivation environment is excellent, the loss outweighs the gain with the degree of danger. Tian Hunzi saw the divine son of Ti's disapproval and said angrily, I know. The divine son of Ti looked at Tian Hunzi and sighed. If you know, why did you still make such a decision? Tian Hunzi said angrily, It's precisely because I know that I want to step into the Devil Realm. The divine son of Ti said leisurely. Tian Hunzi was slightly stunned when he heard the divine son of Ti's words. The anger on his face gradually faded. Obviously, he gradually understood the divine son of Ti's meaning. I want to reverse time. As far as I know, there is no realm that can help me reverse cause and effect. That's why I want to become a saint, the divine son of Body said. His tone was very calm, but it was filled with an unimaginably complex emotion, and there was pain within it. There was sorrow, but there was also an astonishing determination and boldness. In this world, although every cultivator pursues to become a sage, they are tirelessly using all means to pursue the slightest possibility of becoming a sage. However, how many people could say that they wanted to become a saint in such a loud voice? Becoming a saint. These two words looked very simple, just two words floating in the air. However, the weight contained within it was enough to crush the entire world. To any cultivator, such a goal was the ultimate and most elusive of all, the most arrogant target. For all cultivators, even if they wanted to achieve this goal, they could only call it from the bottom of their hearts. They could only look up to it and pursue it with a humble attitude. Saying this out loud was a form of arrogance. It was a delusion, a lack of self-awareness. In such an environment, the divine prince was able to directly say that he wanted to become a sage. One could imagine how courageous he must be to be able to do so. Luo Fan was currently attached to the Divine Son of Body's body. As he listened to the Divine Son of Body's words, an indescribable feeling suddenly surged in his heart. Becoming a sage. This was also the goal he pursued, the end of all his efforts. However, he had never been so firm and so direct with anyone else that he wanted to become a sage. Such boldness. I'm not as good as you. Such a thought suddenly flashed through Luo Fan's mind. At that moment, Luo Fan finally developed an emotion called admiration for the owner of the memory he was reading. Tian Hunzi's mouth was wide open as he looked at the Divine Son of Body. The expression in his eyes kept changing, but it eventually turned into admiration. I never thought that I would hear such words from you, Tian Hunzi said after a long time. I never thought that I would say such words either. However, this feeling is not bad. The Divine Son of Body suddenly smiled faintly. The smile contained a kind of enlightenment, a kind of open-mindedness that seemed to have swept away all the hesitation in his heart. He couldn't give up on reversing karma and recovering time. The only thing that could allow him to do this was to become a sage. In that case, the only thing he could do was, of course, become a sage. Things had always been that simple. As for how difficult it was to become a sage and how uncertain a goal it was, what difference did it make? No matter how difficult or uncertain it was, he had to put in all his effort and pursue it with all his might. That was the way things were. Tian Hunzi looked at the Divine Son of Body and gradually revealed an open-minded smile. I understand. Let me know when you want to enter the demon world. I will go with you so that we can take care of each other. At that moment, his mind became clear, and he quickly thought of the reason why the Divine Son of Body had to enter the demon world. In this normal world, although there were 7 saints, since ancient times there had only been 7 saints for billions of years. Even if the 7 saints had accepted countless disciples, passed down countless techniques, made countless arrangements for them, and helped them immeasurably, until now, no one had been able to become a saint. Although the Divine Son of Body was confident in himself, he didn't dare to think that he was the disciple of the sages with the best aptitude, the best comprehension, the best opportunities, and the greatest help from the sages in the past billions of years. Under such circumstances, how could he possibly be able to do things that the disciples of the sages who were better than him couldn't? How could he possibly think that they could become sages in this world? In comparison, the demon world was different. Compared to the normal world, the demon world's birth time was on a completely different level. The birth time of a normal world was measured in billions of years, and the number in front of this unit could be extremely huge and shocking. On the other hand, the demon world was formed by the sages condensing the power of the great calamity of the world, and its birth time was measured in trillions of years. And the number in front of this unit might not be that big. Under such circumstances, the birth time of the demon world was countless times different. The demon world could actually give birth to a sage. This was an achievement that the 7 great sages had failed to achieve, even though they had worked hard for billions of trillions of years. This was enough to show how extraordinary the demon world was. It was enough to show how important the existence of the demon world was to the Divine Son who was determined to become a sage and had no way out. This was the Divine Son of Body's choice. It was a matter of course. Okay. The Divine Son of Body's face froze slightly when he heard Tian Hunzi's words, and then he laughed heartily. Then let's go. Let's go back to the dojo to recover first, and then we'll go find the River Mountain Gate. With your strength, it shouldn't be a problem to destroy the River Mountain Gate now. Tian Hunzi smiled and said, That's good. I've had a lot of enlightenment in that space-time over the years. I think it should be enough for my dojo to take shape. The Divine Son of Body smiled. The two of them laughed and soared into the sky. They no longer cared about the situation of the magma flow below and directly rushed out of the sea and left the area. Not long after, the two of them arrived at the dojo of the Divine Son of Body. With the experience of hundreds of thousands of years of adventure, the friendship between the Divine Son of Body and Tian Hunzi had already made a huge leap. At this moment, the Divine Son of Body had changed the dojo, and there was no longer a need for Tion Hunzi to avoid it. After arriving at the dojo that only had one space-time and was surrounded by a void, the divine son of body directly sat cross-legged, and the chi and blood in his body surged. A world of chi and blood began to spread in all directions from where he sat, and in the blink of an eye, it filled the entire dojo. It even covered the space-time that originally existed in the dojo, making that space-time seem as if it didn't exist. The changes in this world of chi and blood were generally similar to when he had broken through, but there were many differences in many details. And these differences caused the development of this world of chi and blood to be greatly different from that of the previous world of chi and blood. The civilization that was born in the entire world of chi and blood was also completely different. In the end, it also led to the peak of this world of chi and blood, but it was many times stronger than before. Luo Fan was inside the body of the divine son of body. Looking at what the divine son of body was doing, he was quite happy. Through the comprehension of the son of Ti's breakthrough last time, he had obtained an alternative method of comprehending this world of chi and blood. At this time, the son of Ti's using this method to advance his Tao of the body was naturally in line with his wishes. It allowed him to see the son of Ti's Tao of the body clearly, without any obstruction, and from it, he gained endless comprehension of the Tao of the body of Ti's Tao. And although this did not directly make his cultivation realm break through the profound Tao Master realm and become the exceptional Tao Master, it also made him feel that his accumulation had become more profound, and the difficulty of breaking through was almost decreasing at every moment. This was already enough to make him satisfied. This time, the evolution of the divine son of body's world of chi and blood did not last for long, only a short 100 years. After 100 years, the entire world of chi and blood turned from prosperity to decline and finally disappeared completely, all of it integrated into the body of the divine son of body. And during this process, the cultivation realm of the divine son of body had unknowingly recovered to the peak and even showed signs of leaping to a higher realm. And the remnants of the evolution of the world of chi and blood naturally condensed into dozens of strange space-times, directly side by side with the space-times that existed in the Taoist field at the beginning, forming a space-time group. Just from a number of space-times, one could already see the huge gap between the world of chi and blood that the divine son of body had evolved in the past 100 years and the world of chi and blood that had evolved before. Congratulations, it seems that it won't be long before you can break through again and surpass me. Not far away from the divine son of body, Tion Hunzi, who had clearly seen the whole process of the divine son of body's breakthrough side. His voice was mixed with a kind of joy from the heart, and, at the same time, there was an inexplicable sense of loss. Naturally, he was happy because the cultivation realm of the divine son of body, a friend who had gone through trials and tribulations with him, had improved greatly, and the sense of loss was even simpler. Back then, when he was already at the peak of the great accomplishment of a sage to be, the divine son of body was still at the peak of the great accomplishment of a sage to be. But now, he was still at the peak of the great accomplishment of a sage to be, while the divine son of body was already about to break through the peak of the great accomplishment of a sage to be. This feeling of being surpassed by a latecomer. Even if this person was a friend who had gone through trials and tribulations with him, it was impossible for him not to feel a little disappointed. Seeing Tion Hunzi's expression, the divine son of body smiled. I have so many good conditions, and with your help, I have avoided so many detours. If I still can't improve fast enough, how can I face others? Haha, I'm not that weak. Seeing that the divine son of body was comforting him, Tion Hunzi couldn't help but laugh. Said, hearing this, the divine son of body also smiled. Okay, continue your closed-door training and try to break through in one go. I'll make some preparations so that you can destroy the river and mountain sect as soon as you break through. Tion Hunzi changed the topic of the divine son of body's cultivation speed. Said with a smile, okay, although the river and mountain sect is nothing compared to the sects of the sages, it is still a first-class sect in the world after all. They must have many trump cards. After causing so much trouble for so many years, they must have sensed that someone is going to deal with them. If they don't prepare well, I'm afraid there might really be some trouble. The divine son of Body didn't stand on ceremony with Tion Hunzi. He said directly. Tion Hunzi chuckled and nodded. Then he turned around and took a light step, leaving the dojo. Over the years, while the divine son of Body had been cultivating, Tion Hunzi hadn't been idle either. He had already completely recovered from his injuries and returned to his peak state. At this time, it was naturally no problem for him to go and deal with these matters. After Tion Hunzi left, the divine son of Body didn't hesitate and once again immersed himself in cultivation. However, this time, he didn't evolve the chi and blood world. Instead, he seemed to have fallen into the deepest state of sleep. His body began to slowly change in the void. So it's like this. Luo Fan, who was observing the changes in the divine son of Body's body, saw the changes, and his eyes lit up. This method of cultivating the Tao of the body was something he had never thought of before, but it allowed him to have a deeper understanding of the mysteries of the Tao of the body. The divine son of Body's body was lying on his side in the air. As the chi and blood in his body flowed, it was like the waves of the sea. His heartbeat was like the roar of thunder, causing the surrounding void to tremble slightly. Even the dozens of space-time in the dojo were like planets orbiting stars, slowly revolving around his body. His body continued to grow during this process. From less than 10 feet, he grew to 10 feet in just a breath's time, then 100 feet, 1,000 feet, 100,000 feet. In the end, when he completely stopped growing, his body had become tens of billions of miles tall. As his huge body lay on his side in the void, the dozens of space-times around him seemed to really become planets near a star, looking very small. Due to his terrifying size, every time the divine son of Body inhaled, it seemed like everything in the universe was sucked into his body. It even caused space-time to collapse, forming little black holes around his nostrils. Every time he exhaled, it seemed like he was spitting out everything in the universe in an instant. The terrifying wind almost covered the void, causing the many space-times that revolved around him to become duckweed in the wind and almost be blown away. Every time his heart beat, it seemed like the world was destroyed and the universe was reborn, producing a world-shaking effect. The chi and blood flowing in his body was like the greatest river in the world. Just the sound of it was extremely shocking, enough to make any living being's expression change. Luo Fan looked at the divine son of Body's changes. In a trance, it seemed like the abstract body formed by the chi and blood world had completely overlapped with him. That huge and terrifying body seemed to have completely displayed the most fundamental nature of the way of the body, allowing the many mysteries of the way of the body that he had comprehended in the past to gradually fuse together. He vaguely felt like his body was going to change. He wanted his body to break away from the body of the Tao fruit and change the structure of the body that he had fused with everything he had cultivated in the past. This kind of change, in essence, was naturally a type of increase. It represented that his power, his cultivation, and his strength were increasing. However, the moment he sensed this change, Luo Fan directly broke out in a cold sweat. He instantly stopped the process of comprehending the divine son of Body's body. He shut his eyes tightly and quickly constructed the strange vortex that he had seen in the strange space-time in his mind. After the vortex was constructed, he frantically urged the vortex to continuously send the many thoughts that he had generated at every moment into the vortex, allowing the vortex to thoroughly cleanse each of his thoughts. The thoughts that were originally loaded with a lot of information and contained as strong were once again cleansed into pure, ordinary thoughts. Then he brought them back into his mind. Because Luo Fan's understanding of the laws of the vortex had already deepened, the power of the vortex was many times stronger than when he had first constructed it. The speed of cleansing and the depth of the vortex were no longer comparable to before. Very soon, Luo Fan felt his mind clear up. Although the many experiences he had obtained from the divine son of Body were still there, They seemed to have happened a long, long time ago. The changes that were happening to his body also completely stopped because of this. Chapter 11:18. Luo Fan's body gradually left the divine son of Ti's body and reappeared in the small cave abode that he had opened up in front of the two doors. He had directly left the process of comprehending the divine son of Ti's experience and comprehension and returned to reality. That was really dangerous just now. This body was almost about to completely enter the way of the body and be assimilated by the divine son of Ti. It seems that I won't be able to comprehend the divine son of Ti's experience and comprehension for the time being. Luo Fan frowned as he looked at the door in front of him helplessly. What had happened just now was none other than the fact that the divine son of Ti's way of the body had naturally developed during his cultivation process. This kind of climate caused the divine son's Tao of the body to unknowingly surpass the Tao of the fruit of the way that he cultivated. It began to naturally transform his body, causing his body to begin to break away from his Tao of the fruit of the way and directly enter the path of the Tao of the body. Such a method of breaking away from one's own cultivation and the way of the body could possibly reap considerable benefits in a short period of time. It was very likely that Luo Fan would follow the divine son of Ti's way all the way to the highest realm that the divine son of Ti had reached, which was to set foot on the 9th step. Of course, this was based on the situation where his cultivation realm was still about the same when he had set foot on the step. However, after reaching that level, if Luo Fan wanted to make another breakthrough, it would be equivalent to completely breaking away from the divine son of Ti's way of the body, which was equivalent to completely transcending the divine son of Ti's way of the body. The difficulty was so great that it was billions of times higher than when he had cultivated to that level. Originally, it was already extremely unlikely for one to break through after cultivating one's own Tao to such a level, so it was clearly impossible for one to do so if it were to be reduced by 1,000,000,000,000 times. The reason why the way of the body could surpass the fruit of way great path that Luo Fan had cultivated was not because the way of the body was more advanced or profound than the fruit of way great path. It was just because the way of the body was more complete than the fruit of way great path that Luo Fan had cultivated. What Luo Fan had obtained was the profundity of the way of the fleshly body. It was on a higher level than the great Tao of the Tao fruits that he had comprehended. After all, Luo Fan's Tao fruit was only at the profound realm of Tao Master, which was equivalent to the profound realm of Sage to Be. What he was comprehending was the profoundness of the physical body of the divine son of body. He had already broken through the peak of the great accomplishment of Sage to Be and started to step into the peak of Sage to Be. His realm was one level higher. Even though Luo Fan believed that his Tao fruit Tao was of a higher level than the Tao of the body, he could not change the fact that the Tao of the body, which was of a higher level, directly surpassed the Tao fruit Tao. Therefore, only then did the way of the flesh begin to take the initiative to change Luo Fan's body, wanting to bring his body directly into the path of the way of the flesh. Looking at the door in front of him, Luo Fan could not help but feel depressed, as if there was a mountain of treasures in front of him, but he could not take it away. Fortunately, he had a strong will and quickly suppressed his gloominess. He turned around and stepped into the other of the two doors. That was the door that represented the experience and comprehension of Tian Hunzi. Behind this door was a world as well, and he threw himself into it. Luo Fan would also have the feeling that he had incarnated into the original Tian Hunzi and experienced everything that Tian Hunzi had experienced. Since the divine son of body can't do it, let's try Tian Hunzi. I hope that the memory of Tian Hunzi can help me understand the key and achieve the perfection of Tao Master. At that time, I will be able to step into the memories of the divine son of body once again and comprehend the way of his body. The moment Luo Fan stepped into the door, his mind flashed with a thought. It was such a thought. The reason why he could step into the memory of the divine son of body again after achieving the perfection of Tao Master and comprehend all the experience and comprehension of the divine son of body was that as long as he achieved the perfection of Tao Master, his Tao fruit Tao could be raised to the same level as the divine son of body in the memory that he had stopped previously. The Tao he cultivated would naturally be able to completely resist the way of the body of body, allowing him to absorb the necessary nutrients from it and strengthen his Tao fruit Tao again. Of course, this was only temporary. The way of the body of body existed until the ninth step unless he could continue to comprehend and break through. Otherwise, there would be a time when his Tao fruit Tao could not reach the level of the way of the body, and he would not be able to bear it. This time, when he stepped into the door of the world of Tian Hunzi's memory, Luo Fan did not stay for too long. It was only a short period of about 10,000 years. After 10,000 years, when Luo Fan stepped out of the door and returned to the small cave mansion, his cultivation realm had reached the end of the profound realm of Tao Master. He only needed a little bit of comprehension to break through the shackles and achieve the perfection of Tao Master. Unfortunately, compared to the memory of the divine son of body, Tian Hunzi's memory is too fragmented. It can't help me break through the limit and achieve the perfection of Tao Master. Luo Fan thought helplessly. In the past 10,000 years, what he comprehended was also only a part of the memory of Tian Hunzi. After all, the way of the soul that Tian Hunzi cultivated was also an unimaginably powerful Tao. It was not much weaker than the way of the body. Since Luo Fan could not bear the way of the body of a peak sage to be when he was at the profound realm of Tao Master, he naturally could not bear the way of the soul of a peak sage to be. With a sigh, Luo Fan lifted his foot and stepped out of the small cave mansion. With a gentle wave of his hand, the small cave mansion directly shrank in front of him and turned into a small three-dimensional talisman. Then, he put it into the universe in his sleeve. Although this small cave residence was just casually constructed by him using a three-dimensional talisman, it was an extremely simple matter for him to construct it again. However, there were still many intricacies to it, and it also contained the memories of the God Son and Tian Hunzi. If he destroyed it directly, he would have to reconstruct it the next time he wanted to use it. It would be too troublesome, so he might as well keep it. If he wanted to use it again, he could directly open it. Looking around, he saw that the cultivation place that he had built for Muda was still there, as if nothing had changed. Luo Fan calculated for a bit, and knew that he had been in the memories of the divine son of Ti for millions of years. But in reality, he had only stayed for tens of thousands of years. After all, the time in the memory was completely under Luo Fan's control. If he wanted to, millions of years could be equivalent to an instant. If he didn't want to, an instant could be magnified to millions of years. Therefore, the time he experienced in his memory was completely unrelated to the normal time. Not to mention that millions of years were equivalent to tens of thousands of years. It was only natural that it was equivalent to an instant or billions of years. Luo Fan's eyes pierced through the various barriers that he had set up and directly saw Muda. At this moment, Muda was sitting cross-legged, but his mind was no longer in his body. Instead, it had sunk into a space-time door in front of him. Looking at his cultivation realm, he had unknowingly reached the primordial pure yang level. Although it was still a lot weaker than before, every bit of it belonged to him. However, every bit of it belonged to him. All the increase in cultivation caused by merit seemed to have ceased to exist at this moment. Not bad. You've been working hard all these years. Luo Fan couldn't help but feel quite satisfied. Although he didn't take Muda as his disciple, he had given him pointers in cultivation after all, so there was some kinship between them. Naturally, he would pay attention to the progress of Muda's cultivation. Muda was able to start from zero and cultivate to his current realm in just tens of thousands of years, directly achieving the primordial unity pure yang realm. The speed was much faster than what Luo Fan had expected, and it was not because he had unearthed all of his potential. It was impossible for him to wholeheartedly devote himself to it. His eyes narrowed slightly as he traced the connection between Muda's body and mind. His mind pierced through layers of space-time barriers and finally saw Muda's incarnation in a certain space-time. At this moment, Muda had transformed into a golden immortal who had cultivated from an ordinary person. He was adventuring in a perilous place with a dozen other golden immortals. This perilous place seemed to be a cave abode left behind by a Khanate Grand Luo cultivator after his death. There were many restrictive spells and countless traps, but at the same time, there were also many treasures and cultivation methods. Clearly, at this moment, Muda and his companions were doing the most common thing in the cultivation world, exploring and searching for treasures. Luo Fan couldn't help but feel a little amused as he watched them being nervous, cautious, and constantly raising their vigilance to the peak state. However, if there was even the slightest sign of trouble, they would be horrified and make an incomparably intense reaction. He suddenly had some thoughts that he didn't have before. Fine, since I've already thought of it. Let's see if it's your bad luck or your luck. With that thought in mind, his will directly broke through the layers of space-time barriers and descended into that space, directly stepping into the cave abode. When his will descended, it was as if he had directly arrived in the cave abode. As he looked down, the cave abode, which was already grand and boundless in the eyes of ordinary cultivators, was taken into his eyes. This cave abode was opened up in a small kiliacosm. However, this small kiliacosm wasn't boundless. It was only a few 100 million miles in radius. Moreover, this area of hundreds of millions of miles was divided into 5 sections according to the 5 elements. Each section had a grand Dao palace. Outside the Dao palace, there were many strange creatures. Because of the long years of development, they had formed a brand new civilization that revolved around the 5 Dao palaces. As for Muda and his companions, they were hiding from the creatures of this civilization while doing their best to test the formation of one of the 5 Dao palaces. They were trying to find a way to break through the formation and enter the Dao palace. As Luo Fan scanned the cave abode with his will, he instantly grasped everything in it. The creator of this abode was merely a cultivator at the innate golden immortal realm. An existence like this was extremely formidable in the eyes of those cultivators that were exploring the abode, and just a little bit of his might was sufficient to cause them to die a graveless death. But as far as Luo Fan was concerned, a single thought was sufficient to cause them to die a graveless death. Under such circumstances, with just a slight spread of his senses, he instantly wiped away the will left behind by the Khanate Grand Luo cultivator in the cave abode, as well as the restrictive spells left behind by the Khanate Grand Luo cultivator. With another thought, everything in the cave abode instantly underwent a tremendous change, whether it was the formation or the structure of the cave abode. Of course, these changes happened extremely quickly. Even the cultivators were trying their best to find the mysteries of the formation and were fighting against the power of the cave abode couldn't detect these changes at all. They couldn't sense these changes at all. To them, the entire cave only shook slightly. There was no change at all. In the thousands of years since they stepped into the cave abode, the slight tremble had happened countless times. Naturally, they wouldn't pay attention to it. This is more like it. Luo Fan looked at the cave abode that had changed, and a slight look of satisfaction appeared on his illusory face. At this moment, the surface of the cave abode did not seem to have changed at all. However, the inside of the cave abode had been turned upside down. The interior of the 5 Taoist palaces were originally just some buildings. At this moment, they had become small worlds. These small worlds did not surpass the functions of the original buildings, and they were still combined according to the various characteristics of the buildings to form the complete Taoist palaces. However, their power was much stronger than before, and the treasures contained within them were also changed because of such changes, and they were also much more valuable. Above the 5 Taoist palaces, there was a hidden space that didn't originally exist. This space was supported by the 5 Taoist palaces. Although it appeared to be another space, in reality, it was formed by the combination of the 5 Taoist palaces in a very strange way. From another perspective, The buildings in the five Taoist palaces were like colorful dots, and the space-time was like a landscape painting formed by these colorful dots. Of course, these colorful dots were on the same level as the landscape painting. However, if living beings of the size of these colorful dots, or even smaller living beings, looked at this painting, they would only see huge colorful dots, and would not be able to see the landscape painting formed by these colorful dots, and would not be able to see the landscape painting that had amazing artistic value. The relationship between the buildings in the five Taoist palaces and that hidden space was even deeper. It was just like the relationship between the colorful dots and the landscape painting. As for cultivators like Muda, they were like living beings that were countless times smaller than the colorful dots. After the changes made by Luo Fan, the entire cave abode did not surpass the level of the Khanate Grand Luo, and it did not change the minor kiliacosm into a medium kiliacosm or a great kiliacosm. The foundation of the entire cave abode was still the same as before. However, the degree of profundity. It was already a world of difference. If the golden immortal realm cultivator that created this abode was still alive, he would surely be extremely shocked by the appearance of this abode at this moment, and he would even directly prostrate himself in worship towards Luo Fan, who created all of this. The current changes in the cave abode had practically dug out all the potential of this minor kiliacosm to its limit. It had already done everything that a Khanate Grand Luo cultivator could do. Just the current state of the cave abode alone was enough to make any Khanate Grand Luo cultivator pay any price in exchange for it. With a slight thought, Luo Fan had already stepped into the space that had just been formed, and an illusory figure condensed within it. There was nothing else in this space, and it was just a boundless sea of lightning. There were countless strange lightning living beings in this sea, and they lived, fought, and evolved the profundities of the Tao of Lightning. The Tao of Lightning was the Tao cultivated by the Khanate Grand Luo cultivator who left this cave abode behind. Of course, he was only at the Khanate Grand Luo realm. Even though he cultivated the Tao of Lightning, it was extremely inferior when compared to Luo Fan's Tao fruit of the Tao, the divine son of TTI's body, and even the martial monarch's Tao of martial techniques. If it was according to the Tao of Lightning that this Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivator had grasped, then this sea of lightning would at most be a deathly still lake of lightning, and it would be utterly impossible for it to be like this. It was like a boundless sea of lightning, and it was even a sea of lightning that was filled with vitality and had countless living beings evolving within it. Luo Fan didn't come here purely for the sake of showing off his strength. He came here because he was moved and he had the intention to help Muda. Therefore, it was impossible for him to directly hide the Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivator's shallow Tao of lightning in the depths of this cave abode. Instead, he directly converted his various comprehensions and knowledge of the Tao of lightning into the Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivator's Tao of lightning and left it here in a similar way. Although Luo Fan cultivated the Tao fruit of Tao, and not the Tao of lightning, the Tao fruit of Tao came from his worldview of the laws, and it was all-encompassing. It contained almost everything in the universe, and it even barely included the state of chaos and the state before the state of chaos. Such a Tao fruit of Tao was obviously related to the Tao of lightning as well. With Luo Fan's current cultivation realm at the peak of the profound realm of Tao Master. Even if he only had a slight understanding of the Tao of Lightning, the profundities of the Tao of Lightning would definitely be countless times more profound than that of a Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivator who cultivated the Tao of Lightning. Chapter 1119. In the center of this sea of lightning, there was a huge human figure standing tall. The human body was unimaginably huge. His feet touched the bottom of the sea of lightning, while his head touched the sky of this space-time. He could vaguely feel the limit of the sky. The human figure's face was rather blurry, but his body exuded an unimaginably powerful aura. He was like a supreme existence that controlled all the lightning in the universe. Although there were countless lightning creatures in the sea of lightning, the closer they got to the human figure, the fewer lightning creatures there were, and the stronger they were. It was as if the weak lightning creatures did not dare to get close to the human figure at all. With a thought, Luo Fan arrived in front of the human figure. He raised his hand and pressed down on the human figure. In the blink of an eye, strands of lightning flashed across the figure. Then, the human figure's aura slowly retracted until it became invisible. He looked like the most ordinary stone statue. As this happened, the lightning creatures above the sea of lightning began to try to get close to the human figure. Not long after, they filled the area around the human figure. The entire sea of lightning was no different from how it was at the beginning. That's it. How much you can benefit from it will depend on your luck. After he finished doing all of this, Luo Fan smiled lightly, and then his consciousness instantly left the abode left behind by this first heaven golden immortal realm cultivator before leaving this expanse of space. The moment Luo Fan left, Muda, who was testing the defense of one of the palaces in the cave abode and was about to step into it, suddenly froze, as if he had sensed something. He suddenly stood still and raised his head to look at the void. His gaze was trying to penetrate through the layers of barriers and see the thing that touched his heart. Fellow Muda, hurry up and do it. The opportunity is fleeting. An old man roared. The roar called Muda back from the strange feeling. He said with a solemn expression, "I'm sorry. I was distracted just now." As he spoke, he raised his hand and drew a mysterious trajectory in the void. It stretched the laws around him and caused all sorts of subtle changes. He directly poked his hand into the seemingly invisible void in front of him. As he poked his hand in, the void suddenly underwent an earth-shattering change. Countless complicated and mysterious runes rapidly appeared around his finger as he poked it. In the process, it began to undergo a subtle and unimaginable change. This change spread wildly in all directions. In an instant, it had already spread like a curtain in the sky, forming a huge light barrier in front of them, blocking them from the Tao Palace in front of them. Good. We've finally deciphered the true form of this formation. Wulong start. The old man who had berated Muda just now clearly had an extraordinary status, as he directly commanded. A middle-aged man with a gloomy expression nodded. He raised his hand and slapped forward. Countless runes drilled out of his palm. From the palm of his hand, endless runes drilled out and turned into a river of runes, rushing into the light barrier in front of them. In an instant, the runes collided with the countless runes. This collision created an incomparably intense tremor, causing the entire Tao Palace and the entire cave abode to reverberate with the sound of the tremors. The many strange creatures living in the cave abode were instantly filled with endless terror. Countless gazes were directed at the Tao Palace. Among them, most of the creatures directly knelt on the ground, begging the heavens for forgiveness. They wanted to forgive the sins that they had committed that they did not know about. Many beings who had reached the immortal realm were using their own special methods to quickly fly towards the location of the Palace of the Tao from all over the place. At this moment, the old man used an unimaginably fast voice to command everyone around him to attack or use their divine abilities. They either used hand seals or threw out their magic treasures and artifacts that they had prepared beforehand. In a short while, a tunnel had already been created on the light barrier in front of them. It was a gray and hazy tunnel that seemed to lead to an unpredictable place. "It's through. Hurry up and go in. We're being held back by those Tao soldiers. We'll definitely be in big trouble," the old man shouted and was the first to rush into the tunnel. Following behind him, the others also rushed in one after another. After the last person rushed in, the light barrier that had suddenly appeared suddenly disappeared. Along with it was the strange tunnel that seemed to lead to another space-time. After Muda rushed into the tunnel, he found that there was no one else around him, and he himself had arrived in a strange, starry sky. This starry sky was boundless, and there were countless stars within it. Around each star, there were planets that looked extremely small, but were innately huge. He could even see many strange civilizations evolving on those planets. What is this? Didn't we enter the Blackwater Palace? Why do we suddenly appear in the starry sky? Muda looked at the scene before him that he had not expected and coda not help but be slightly stunned. The 5 Tao palaces in this cave abode were divided by the 5 elements. Among them, the water elemental Tao palace was the black water Tao palace. The other 4 Tao palaces were the green wood Tao palace, the red fire Tao palace, the white gold Tao palace, and the yellow earth Tao palace. The reason why they were here was because of the old man's invitation. Back when he came to this space-time to travel, he made quite a name for himself in the process of raising his cultivation realm to the golden immortal realm. Almost every cultivator in this space-time knew that the wood cultivator, Muda, was one of the few wood cultivators in the world. His understanding of wood cultivators had reached an unimaginable level. Under such circumstances, a peak golden immortal realm powerhouse came to Muda one day and said that he knew of a cave abode left behind by a Khanate Grand Luo cultivator. There were countless treasures there, and even the inheritance of the Khanate Grand Luo cultivator. He wanted to invite Muda to explore it with him. Because Muda had come to this space-time to travel, he did not hesitate to agree to the old man's invitation. That was why he had come here today. The reason why Muda was surprised was because when the old man was trying to convince him, the old man had given him a rough explanation of the cave dwelling. The situation of the Blackwater Palace was mentioned in the old man's description. However, the Blackwater Palace was just a building in the old man's description. Although it had many mysteries, it could not form a starry sky like this. Did this person lie to me? Muda suddenly had such a thought. After having this thought, he began to recall the interaction between him and the old man. He could not help but have more doubts. This was the case for any sentient creature. When they began to doubt someone, the small inconsistencies in that person's past would be magnified. In the end, it would provide more and more evidence for the doubts in their hearts, making them grow deeper and deeper. Although Muda was transformed from the teleportation tree door and was not an ordinary creature, he was no exception. As he grew more and more suspicious, Muda summoned all the magic treasures he had refined over the years without hesitation and had them hover around him. They floated around him and released countless colorful lights that surrounded him. After summoning the magic treasures to protect himself, he carefully observed the starry sky. An inexplicable sense of familiarity rose in his heart as he observed it. Why is this feeling so familiar? It's as if I felt it somewhere before. Muda thought as he lifted his feet and flew forward in the direction that he was extremely familiar with. In a trance, his figure became faster and faster. Eventually, he turned into a spot of light in the starry sky. It became faintly discernible, as if it would disappear at any time. As time passed, the spot of light became fainter and longer. At a certain moment, suddenly, it shook and disappeared without a trace. At this time, Muda suddenly came back to his senses. Looking around, he discovered something that shocked him to the core. Unknowingly, he had already turned back into the teleportation tree door. It had become the dojo that he had stayed in for trillions of years. His body was still the gigantic teleportation tree gate that was connected to 36,000 different spaces. There was not even a shred of merit on his body, and he looked exactly like he did before he met Luo Fan. What's going on? Wasn't I creating the Blackwater Palace? Why did I suddenly return here? Such a thought flashed through Muda's mind. This thought brought about boundless shock and astonishment. He carefully sensed everything about himself and the dojo. In the end, his astonishment gradually dissipated and was replaced by a sense of doubt. Could it be that everything that happened to me before was just my imagination? Or have I been reborn hundreds of thousands of years ago? This thought replaced all the shock in his heart and became unbreakable in his mind and mind. The reason for this was very simple. It was because in his senses, there was not a trace of falsehood in his surroundings. It was completely the same as before he met Luo Fan. The circulation of his power, his control over the entire dojo, the 36,000 space-times in the dojo. Everything was so complete and perfect that it was no different from the beginning. As a result, he did not dare to doubt that everything he saw, heard, and sense was fake. That was why he had such doubts. Naturally, he could not be completely convinced of the existence of such doubts so easily. He used all the methods he could think of to experiment according to his own knowledge. He tried to find out what was fake and where he wanted to find the truth. This process lasted for nearly 1,000 years. When nearly 1,000 years had passed, Muda finally let out a long sigh. That's right, this is real. I've either been reborn hundreds of thousands of years ago, or everything that happened before was just an illusion caused by chi deviation. After confirming this, he was overjoyed. This meant that he had recovered hundreds of thousands of years of time and avoided the mistake of being contaminated by merit and creating an irreparable weakness for himself. Of course, this was something that was worthy of him being pleasantly surprised. With his previous experience, Muda did not have any doubts this time. He began to modify the spaces to obtain more merit and worked hard to make his will independent. He worked hard to make his will surpass his body so that he could transcend and become a cultivator like before he was reborn or in the illusion. Because he had experienced it once, it was naturally much smoother this time around. His speed was several times faster than before. He completed the modification of the spaces one by one. Because of this, he himself had obtained boundless karma. The effect of this merit was no different from what he knew in the past. It also allowed him to transcend. His will surpassed his body and condensed in the outside world to become a real cultivator. Finally, his will condensed into another body of his. When he finally became a cultivator, Muda could not help but feel a sense of confusion. Why don't I see Brother Luo Fan? If I was reborn, Brother Luo Fan should have already arrived earlier. He thought, if that's the case, could it be that I'm not reborn? However, if I'm not reborn, then what I experienced back then was just an illusion. But why can the method I obtained in the illusion still be used in the real world? And it's so smooth and mysterious. Is there really a hidden illusion? Muda was confused. He could not figure out the truth at all. For a time, his expression kept changing. With that in mind, he cast his gaze towards one of the space-time he had modified. It was the last space-time he had experienced in the illusion. It was also the space where the cave abode was located. No matter what, when I go to that space-time at that time, I should be able to find out the truth. Muda made up his mind and began to calm down. He began to choose the space-time where his real body was, which was a location in the tree-shaped space-time, and opened up a hidden cave abode. He entered it and began to cultivate. He already had 2 cultivation experiences. This time, his cultivation speed was extremely fast. Very quickly, he reached the celestial realm. Then, very quickly, he stepped into the true immortal realm, then the golden immortal realm, and broke through the limit to become a primordial pure yang immortal and an innate grand luo. In the end, when Muda completed his cultivation of an innate grand luo without the help of any merit, it was already hundreds of thousands of years later. It was close to the time when he entered that space. When it was almost time, Muda collected his thoughts, left his cave abode, and stepped into that space. Because he wanted to be the same as before, his performance was exactly the same as before. He also restrained his own strength and did everything he did in that space-time. Things went very smoothly, or rather, it was very terrifying. In the end, an old man came to find him and told him that he was going to explore a cave abode of an innate grand luo cultivator that contained boundless treasures and countless inheritances. When he saw the old man and heard the old man say the exact same words as before, an indescribable chill surged out from the bottom of Muda's heart. It made him feel as if he was thrown into extreme coldness, and an indescribable fear began to rise in his heart. Why is this happening? Why is this happening? Why is it exactly the same as before? Am I reborn, or was what I experienced before just an illusion? This thought made him vaguely feel that there was an invisible hand controlling everything from the supreme position. Almost muddle-headed, Muda followed the old man and the other cultivators into the cave abode and arrived before the Blackwater Palace. He used the same method to break through the palace's defensive formation, which also attracted the attention of the countless Dao soldiers in the palace. Countless Dao soldiers charged over and they also stepped into the passageway at the last moment. The moment he stepped into the passageway, Muda was suddenly stunned. Two dazzling beams of light shot out his eyes. The light surpassed the limits of a golden immortal, breaking through the primordial pure yang realm and the innate grand luo realm to reach the peak of the innate grand luo realm. In other words, it had reached the peak that Muda could reach. It's not the same. Why is this place different? Muda murmured. The Blackwater Palace was just as the old man had said. It was a building. Although it contained countless mysteries, it was still a building in essence. But it was not the boundless starry sky that he had experienced before. The crux is definitely here. In an instant, Muda came to a realization. He looked around, completely ignoring the disbelief in the eyes of the cultivators who had come with him because of the changes in his body. He also ignored their shock and vigilance as he carefully observed everything in the Blackwater Palace. His observation lasted for more than 10 days. During this time, the cultivators who had come with him did not dare to move at all. They only stood at the side with cold sweat dripping down their foreheads. They had killed themselves countless times in their hearts, and each time they did it in a completely different way. Of course, they were not torturing themselves, but they had been thinking about how Muda would deal with them. In other words, what method would he use to kill them? So this is an illusion. What I thought was an illusion is the real thing. I should have known. Muda let out a long sigh. As he sighed, the entire world around him shattered and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye, revealing a huge portal floating in the boundless starry sky. Chapter 1120. Please remember the permanent website. Although Muda had stayed in the illusion for hundreds of thousands of years, he instantly knew that he had only stayed in the illusion for a short day as soon as he left it. Please remember the website of this site for high-quality updates, Yuba.net. At this moment, it had not been more than 24 hours since he had stepped into the illusion. After Muda stepped through the door, he was met with a boundless void. Even space, time, rules did not exist. It was absolute nothingness. Muda was slightly taken aback by the emptiness. Then, he turned around and realized that apart from the huge in-hue that he came out from, there was an extremely large building behind him. The buildings were extremely familiar to Muda. They looked exactly like the normal Blackwater Palace, but each building seemed to be even more mysterious. He could vaguely sense the ripples of space-time coming from the buildings. He could tell with a glance that there were strange space-times inside. Muda sighed and took a light step forward. In a blink of an eye, he arrived before the largest building behind the door. He had stayed in the illusion for hundreds of thousands of years. Although he did not bring out all of his power, he brought out all of his realms. At this moment, although the power of his incarnation was still at the peak of the Golden Immortal Realm, it was already at the peak of the innate Grand Luo Realm. Such a realm allowed his control over the power of his body to reach the acme of perfection. In the past, he might have been able to directly step to the door like this, but he would definitely not have been able to do it so easily. The ripples that he gave off would definitely be thousands of times stronger than what he was now. Muda could already feel the benefits of the illusory realm as soon as he used this method. He could not help but feel grateful to Luo Fan. Brother Luo Fan, you've really put in a lot of effort. With the help of this illusion, I've almost eliminated the side effects of borrowing merit. In the future, my progress and cultivation shouldn't be too affected, Muda thought. It was a pity. If Luo Fan was here, he would definitely know how wrong Muda's thinking was. He had already borrowed the merit, and it had already fused with his origin. Even though he had already made up for the foundation he had lost by borrowing the merit, and his cultivation speed would no longer be affected in the future, the impact that had already been caused was still there. When the Taoist right that bestowed him with the merit was damaged, the impact was still there. He would definitely suffer extremely great injuries. Perhaps he wouldn't die because of this, but it was absolutely unavoidable that his cultivation would be damaged. Muda naturally did not know about this. When he arrived before the building, he naturally obtained a spell from the door of the building. He circulated the spell slightly. He found that everything in the building was instantly under his control. The situation in the building was completely imprinted in his mind. He raised his hand and pointed at the door of the building. The door suddenly opened, revealing a seemingly illusory space-time. In this seemingly ordinary space, an old man lay flat in the air. There was no longer any signs of life from his body, and it was obvious that he was dead. High-quality update. It's a pity. He couldn't withstand the illusion and was completely immersed in it until the end of his life. Muda looked at the old man and knew the cause of his death. He could not help but sigh inwardly. This old man was the old man who had invited him to explore this cave abode. He was also the old man who knew the most about this cave mansion. Obviously, when he stepped through the door, the old man also entered an illusion. It was even possible that the illusion was the same as what he encountered. It was also a part of his past experience. However, the old man could not distinguish between reality and illusion at all. He treated the illusion as reality and was completely immersed in it. In the end, he died in the illusion, causing his real body to die as well. Novel update. After Muda sighed, he no longer paid attention to the old man and looked around the space-time. He saw that the various mountains, rivers, grass, trees, insects, and fish were formed by the various artifacts. At this moment, Muda had already completely mastered the space-time. He casually waved his hand. These lights and shadows instantly changed and turned into thousands of artifacts. He directly stored them in his storage space. The entire process was as smooth as flowing water, easy and calm. After looting the artifacts, Muda left the space-time and began to explore the buildings in the Tao Palace. Similar to the largest building from before, each building had a strange space-time opened up inside, and some artifacts were stored in each building. There were artifacts, magic treasures, magic tools, pills, medicinal herbs, exotic flowers, rare herbs, natural treasures, and all kinds of precious books. There was almost everything. However, all of them leaned towards the water element. In these buildings, Muda occasionally saw the corpses of one or two cultivators who came with him. After a rough calculation, all the cultivators who came with him were dead. So many people entered the Blackwater Palace, but in the end, he was the only one left. Not a single one of them was able to pass this illusion. I thought there would be at least one or two. Muda couldn't help but sigh after finding all the corpses of his companions. Of course, he didn't have much feelings for those who came with him. After all, they'd only met by chance, and they'd agreed to wander through the abode of a golden, immortal realm cultivator. Even if they were completely fine and hadn't perished because of this illusory realm, an intense battle might arise when they encountered any benefits later on. At that time, it would be even more unsightly if they became enemies. After walking through every building, the incantations Muda received from the doors of each building suddenly intertwined and formed a more complicated and mysterious incantation. Muda was slightly taken aback. He thought about it for a moment and activated the spell. He found that his eyes had suddenly grown infinitely larger. The Blackwater Palace gradually became smaller and smaller. The other 5 palaces entered his field of vision at the same time. They became smaller along with the Blackwater Palace. In the end, when they had shrunk to a certain extent, his eyes trembled. The world in his eyes had already undergone a tremendous change. A boundless sea of lightning appeared in front of his eyes. It was as if he was presenting an earth-shattering spectacle, a world of lightning. This is an almost complete Tao of lightning. Muda was shocked. High-quality updates were just around the corner. At that moment, he found that the world in his eyes changed again. It had returned to the appearance of the Blackwater Tao Palace. It looked no different from before he activated the spell. So, this is what Brother Luo Fan left for me. Muda was overjoyed and extremely excited. Originally, he admired Luo Fan very much. He even wanted to become Luo Fan's disciple and serve him day and night. Coupled with the benefits that the illusion had brought him, his respect for Luo Fan had deepened. He felt even more regret that Luo Fan couldn't accept him as a disciple. Under such circumstances, he suddenly realized that Luo Fan had actually considered so much for him. He had even left so many benefits for him. How could he not be excited? I can see it for an instant, but I can't enter it. It must be because the spell I obtained isn't complete enough. Looks like I'll have to go to the other Tao palaces. Muda thought. With a slight thought, he controlled the power of the Tao palace and activated it. The surrounding space-time changed. His figure had already passed through the barriers of space-time and arrived in front of another Tao palace, the yellow Earth Tao Palace. The 5 Tao palaces of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth were arranged according to the 5 elements. It was naturally in accordance with the principle that the 5 elements generated each other. Among the 5 elements, water gave birth to earth gave birth to wood gave birth to fire gave birth to metal, and metal gave birth to water. Therefore, the Blackwater Tao Palace was a Tao Palace that had a special connection with the Yellow Earth Tao Palace. The items brought from the Blackwater Tao Palace were also the most effective in breaking through the Yellow Earth Tao Palace. At that moment, many Tao soldiers in the cave abode were gathered in the Blackwater Tao Palace. They were either worshipping, vigilant, or hating the Tao Palace. There were no Tao soldiers around the Yellow Earth Tao Palace. Therefore, Muda could break through the defense of the Yellow Earth Tao Palace without any hindrance. This time, although he was the only one breaking through, his speed was much faster than when so many people had broken through together. Moreover, it was much easier. In less than half a day, Muda had broken through the defense of the Yellow Earth Tao Palace and opened up a passageway through the defense. The appearance of the passageway also shook the entire cave abode, causing chaos among the many Tao soldiers in the cave abode. A large portion of them came from the Blackwater Tao Palace to the Yellow Earth Tao Palace, causing the scene outside the Yellow Earth Tao Palace to appear once again. Previously, they had gained nothing in the Blackwater Tao Palace. Naturally, the Yellow Earth Tao Palace was no exception. They guarded for a few days. The Greenwood Tao Palace in the distance shook again, causing a portion of them to head there. In a few more days, the Red Fire Tao Palace arrived. After a few more days, the White Gold Tao Palace also changed. What's going on? Is this world going to be destroyed? Among the Tao soldiers, a highly respected Tao soldier, who was known as a sage, looked at the 5 Tao palaces that were changing one after another in confusion and panic as he murmured. As the Tao soldiers in the cave abode, they were not the first generation. Instead, they had reproduced for countless generations and had long forgotten their ancestors. They had forgotten that this was a cave abode. They only thought that this place was the entire world, the entire world. To them, the 5 Taoist palaces that had stood in the 5 directions of the world since ancient times were supreme existences left behind by the 5 gods of creation. Although the 5 Tao palaces did not bring them many benefits, they were a symbol, a form of spiritual sustenance. Under such circumstances, the changes in the Tao palaces were naturally equivalent to the changes in the place where their spiritual sustenance was placed. It was normal for them to have such absurd thoughts. Of course, perhaps such thoughts were not completely absurd. After all, if the 5 Tao palaces were changed, it would also mean that the dwelling was changing. It was not impossible for the dwelling to be completely destroyed in the end, and the destruction of the dwelling was naturally the same as the end of the world for them. At that moment, Muda did not care about the Tao soldiers at all. He had already broken through to 5 Tao palaces, and he had obtained sufficient cultivation techniques from each Tao palace. After combining them together, his body suddenly experienced an indescribable sublimation. He did not pass through any space-time door or anything like that. In a flash, he had already arrived in the boundless sea of lightning. Apart from the Blackwater Tao Palace, the other 4 Tao palaces, Luo Fan did not set up any difficult tests. Every test was a little troublesome for Muda, but he could definitely pass them in the end. Because he already knew that it was Luo Fan who had set it up, Muda was even more calm when dealing with it. He was no longer at a loss like he was when he faced the illusion in the Blackwater Palace. He easily passed through the test. However, it was also because he had already discovered the truth of the test that his heart wasn't affected much. As a result, even though he had successfully passed through the various tests, the benefits he obtained in the end weren't much. It was incomparable to the time in the Blackwater Palace. Fortunately, his goal wasn't just the 5 Tao palaces. Hence, he wasn't too regretful about it. What is this? After Muda arrived at the Sea of Lightning, he immediately saw a huge statue-like figure in the center of the sea. This figure was simply too huge. It was so huge that anyone who wasn't blind wouldn't be able to ignore it. Where Muda was at, he was at the edge of the Sea of Lightning. Although the Sea of Lightning was almost boundless, it was not truly boundless. It was extremely far away from the center, perhaps hundreds of millions of miles away, which was the edge of the sea. Beyond the edge was a boundless void, a void that did not even have the concept of boundaries. Just like that, Muda looked at the figure. He still felt an indescribable feeling in his heart. In an instant, he knew this figure hides an incomparably precious cultivation technique. This cultivation technique is very important to me. Perhaps it is my hope of completely transcending the shackles of my body. Muda's original body was a teleportation tree door, an ancient tree that the divine son of Ti had somehow modified. Although his will had already surpassed his original body and become a true cultivator. That was only to allow him to cultivate and gain freedom. His essence, his foundation, was still that ancient tree. Perhaps it was not obvious at this moment. But in the future, when he reached a certain height, this foundation would definitely cause a huge impact on him, making it impossible for him to continue breaking through. This was not difficult to understand. Muda's original body was modified by the divine son of Ti from an ancient tree, and the modification method was obviously a method similar to refining Dharma treasures. Therefore, to a certain extent, Muda could also be considered a Dharma treasure. Although his performance was different from ordinary Dharma treasures, his essence was not different. Since it was a different kind of Dharma treasure, his current will was naturally equivalent to a different kind of treasure spirit. As for treasure spirits, even if they had surpassed the shackles of a Dharma treasure, they would definitely have some flaws in their foundation. This flaw was Muda's shackles. When he understood that the figure in the center had a cultivation technique that he needed, Muda could not help but feel excited. He could not wait to immediately go to the figure and obtain the cultivation technique. Due to this urgent expectation, Muda did not hesitate. His body turned into a ray of light and directly headed toward the center of the Thunderbolt Ocean, where the huge figure was. Back then, Luo Fan could travel freely above the Thunderbolt Ocean because he was the creator of the Thunderbolt Ocean and the countless Thunderbolt creatures. He had great control over the ocean and the Thunderbolt creatures, so it was naturally easy for him to not be discovered. At this moment, Muda did not have the identity of Luo Fan at all. As soon as he turned into a ray of light and released his power, he instantly attracted the attention of many Thunderbolt creatures. Naturally, Muda's essence could not be Thunderbolt. This characteristic that was incompatible with the Thunderbolt Ocean and the countless Thunderbolt creatures made the countless Thunderbolt creatures feel as if they had seen an irreconcilable enemy when they saw him. In an instant, they rushed toward Muda without any regard for their own safety. They erupted with countless Thunderbolt spells, wanting to fight Muda to the death. Just like that, Muda's ray of light had only risen for a while before he had to stop the attacks of the countless Thunderbolt creatures. He used all kinds of spells to fight against the Thunderbolt creatures and resist the attacks of the increasing number of Thunderbolt creatures. Fellow Taoist, are you trying to kill me? Muda roared in grief and indignation as he dodged a Thunderbolt creature that was shaped like a white horse but had a pair of Thunderbolt wings. It moved as fast as lightning and spat out thunderballs from time to time. Muda slapped out and hit the head of the Thunderbolt creature, shattering it into countless drops of Thunderbolt liquid that fused into the Thunderbolt Ocean below. Around him, there were hundreds of Thunderbolt creatures of different races that were about the same size as the Thunderbolt creature that he had slapped to death. They were gathering their strength and were ready to pounce on him. The weakest of these Thunderbolt creatures was equivalent to a primordial unity, pure yang realm being, and some of the stronger ones had even stepped into the Khanate Grand Luo realm. One could imagine the pressure Muda felt when he was surrounded by hundreds of such terrifying Thunderbolt creatures. Fortunately, although Muda's physical strength was only at the realm of a golden immortal, his cultivation realm was at the peak of the Khanate Grand Luo realm. Although these thunderbolt creatures were powerful and had marvelous divine abilities, their intelligence was much lower. Therefore, he could still fight and flee at the same time, barely holding on. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for my recommendation or monthly vote. Your support is my greatest motivation. For mobile users, please go to QQ to read. I will provide you with exciting and popular novels for free. Chapter 1121. In the previous 5 Tao palaces, Muda had only spent a few days to pass through them. He had passed through them in a single file and entered this sea of thunder. However, this time, Muda had spent more than 3,000 years above the Thunderbolt Ocean. He had experienced tens of thousands of battles, suffered countless injuries, and killed countless lightning creatures before he finally passed through the Thunderbolt Ocean and the obstruction of countless lightning creatures. In the end, he arrived at the center of the Thunderbolt Ocean and stood before the towering figure. At this moment, there was not a single inch of Muda's body that had not been injured. In fact, his entire body had been shattered tens of thousands of times. If it wasn't for his outstanding cultivation realm, he might have died many years ago. However, such a tragic experience was not without its benefits for him. At the very least, he had become an overlord above the Thunderbolt Ocean after experiencing such a tragic battle. He commanded countless lightning creatures and occupied more than half of the Sea of Lightning. Because of this, he carried a powerful aura that didn't exist before. It was the kind of powerful aura that belonged to absolute supremacy. It was the kind of powerful aura that controlled everything and could decide the life and death of billions of living beings with a single thought. At that moment, there were a few lightning beings in human form standing behind Muda, protecting him respectfully. The lightning creatures above the Thunderbolt Ocean originally didn't know how to cultivate and didn't know how to change their forms. The form they were born in was the form they would take when they grew to their peak. Although this kind of growth method could allow them to unleash unimaginable power, it naturally couldn't be considered as true cultivation. It was also because of this that Muda was able to use his golden immortal body to freely move between the countless lightning creatures that were stronger than him and easily destroy his opponents. They stubbornly survived. However, this kind of benefit to Muda was only when they were his opponents. When these lightning creatures became Muda's subordinates and were subdued by him, it wasn't a happy thing anymore. Every time he looked at the creatures under his command, they would have been able to unleash hundreds or even thousands of times more power with just a slight change. However, because they didn't know how to change, they ended up suffering heavy losses to their opponents. In fact, they were even suppressed by opponents who were clearly inferior to them. He obviously couldn't stand it. Thus, over the years, every time he subdued a few lightning creatures, Muda would create some ordinary ones for them according to their physical conditions. Although they weren't extremely exquisite, Muda had created some ordinary ones for them. However, it was already enough for them to barely use the power they had and allow them to cultivate. As a result, the lightning beings under Muda's command began to gradually transform. From their original beastly forms, they began to take on human forms. In other words, they all had the appearance of Khanate Taoism aptitude. At this moment, the people behind Muda were his most powerful subordinates with the best cultivations. It was precisely because Muda had taught them the cultivation method that Muda's status was extraordinary in the hearts of these lightning creatures. All of them respected Muda from the bottom of their hearts. They would carry out all of Muda's orders, as if they were more important than their own lives. If they didn't have such a mentality, Muda wouldn't have dared to bring them along. He came here. He wanted to comprehend the wonderful method that Luo Fan had left on this figure. He wanted to devote himself wholeheartedly to it. At this time, his body would become very fragile. If the lightning creatures around him were to harbor any ill intentions while he was focusing all of his attention on this figure, then he would definitely die a graveless death. If it wasn't for his absolute trust in these creatures, Muda wouldn't have done this. All of you, stay here and protect me, Muda ordered. After thousands of years of fighting, his voice was filled with awe-inspiring might. It was like a high and mighty god of creation who could seize and take whatever he wanted from the creatures he created. Those creatures were at least at the innate grand Luo realm. Logically speaking, each of them could crush Muda with a single finger. However, when faced with Muda's order, they responded respectfully without any hesitation. Moreover, they quickly spread out in a strange order, protecting the void hundreds of meters around Muda's body, forming an incomparably tight defense. Seeing their reaction, Muda nodded his head in satisfaction. He lifted his foot and took a light step forward. In an instant, his body had already arrived above the figure's outstretched palm. The figure left behind by Luo Fan stood tall with its arms crossed in front of its body. Its face was blurry, but it was slightly raised as if it was looking at the distant sky. Under such circumstances, Muda arriving above the figure's palm was like arriving at his heart. When the lightning spirits below saw Muda fly up into the sky, they cautiously followed him. However, they didn't surround Muda in the center. Instead, they naturally changed their formation and formed a semicircle around Muda's back to the giant figure, protecting him from the outside. Their defense wasn't any weaker than before. This was a mysterious change that was naturally triggered by the formation, so there was no need to explain it further. When Muda arrived here, he felt an indescribable feeling enveloping him. This feeling was so familiar. He traced this feeling upwards, and in an instant, he found the source of this feeling. It was the feeling of Dao, brother Luo Fan, standing in front of him and looking at him calmly. As expected, it's Dao, brother Luo Fan. Muda came to a sudden realization. With a slight thought, the power within his body spread out without hesitation and continuously touched this figure. At the instant his power came into contact with the human figure, he sensed a vast life force suddenly awaken from its slumber. As it flowed, it created a deafening sound. This sound wasn't real, but it was a sound that was completely acting on his mind. It was like the sound of a boundless world being born. It seemed to contain all the mysteries of the universe within it. This sound instantly caused Muda's mind to tremble, and he couldn't control himself. With this sound, the figure seemed to turn from an inanimate object into a real giant. In Muda's mind, the figure suddenly began to slowly lower its head. The originally blurry face gradually became clear and gradually became a face that Muda was familiar with. It was a face with a clear face and eyes that seemed to contain the endless mysteries of the universe. It was Luo Fan's face. Lightning is the source of life, the root of all things. The giant looked down at Muda and spoke. Its voice shook the entire universe and continuously drilled into the depths of Muda's mind. The voice of the origin of life kept shaking his mind and mind. In Muda's mind, this voice was like a living creature. Every tone was like that of an extremely powerful cultivator. It seemed like it contained endless, unfathomable mysteries. It seemed like the tone of this voice contained enough mysteries for him to comprehend for countless years. This voice is definitely Dao Brother Luo Fan's voice. But why does it sound like Dao Brother Luo Fan's voice is even more mysterious than Master's? Muda thought to himself. However, this was only the beginning. When the true content of the voice began, Muda completely forgot about the uniqueness of this voice, because he could already tell that this voice was preaching a Taoist technique. It was a cultivation technique that was extremely important to him. Muda's expression gradually became startled. He stood there in a daze, and the light in his eyes changed. Sometimes he was pleasantly surprised, sometimes he was confused, and sometimes he was shocked. Sometimes he was confused. This change of expression lasted for a full 10 days and 10 nights. After 10 days and 10 nights, his body trembled, and he suddenly broke out of that state. When he looked up again, he discovered that the figure was still the same as the dead statue from before. Its head was still slightly raised, and its face was still as blurry as before. There were no changes that he had felt before. He looked at the lightning creatures around him again. He discovered that they all looked the same as before, as if nothing had happened. Just by looking at it, he could already understand the various abnormal signs from before. It was completely happening in his mind. It could almost be called an illusion. However, this technique is real. Lightning Son of Heaven. I didn't expect there to be such a technique in this world. Gathering the bloodlines of many lightning creatures, reconstructing one's own body, and combining all the bodies in one place to form a powerful body that can directly control the source of lightning. No wonder Daoist brother arranged it this way. These thousands of years were simply a chance for me to comprehend the body forms of many lightning creatures and lay the foundation for cultivating the lightning son of heaven's body. Muda was extremely excited at this moment. That's right. What Luo Fan had left here was the cultivation technique for the lightning son of heaven's body that his disciple had created. However, compared to the lightning son of heaven's body that his disciple had created, the one that Luo Fan had created was of a much higher level. The final lightning son of heaven's body that was formed was also many times stronger. Putting everything else aside, the lightning son of heaven's body that his disciple had created only needed the bodies of the Kuei ox, crouching infant, barking tiger, grasshopper, striking wood, lotus of fate, neon leaf, and rosewood to form. As for the lightning son of heaven's body that Luo Fan had created, it needed the bodies of 12,960 strange beasts to form. In the end, once the lightning son of heaven's body that was formed in such a way was formed, it could at least break through the peak of the innate grand Luo realm and step into the quasi-saint realm. Moreover, after reaching the quasi-saint realm, the power of the divine ability would be unimaginably great. It might be an exaggeration to say that it could fight against those of a higher level, but it would at least be able to reach the peak of that realm. According to Muda's situation, once he had formed the lightning son of heaven's body and reached the quasi-saint realm, the power of his divine ability would be more than 100,000 times stronger than when he had a normal breakthrough. At that time, he would be able to crush a normal Muda with one hand. Moreover, the power of the divine ability was secondary to Muda. More importantly, cultivating the lightning son of heaven's body meant that every time he cultivated the body of a strange beast, it was equivalent to changing the nature of his body once. In the end, after cultivating the bodies of 12,960 exotic beasts, it was equivalent to changing the essence of life 12,960 times. When he condensed the body of the lightning son of heaven, it was a world of difference from his current teleportation tree gate. It was equivalent to completely transcending the shackles of his main body. This was what Muda was most interested in. With this method, I will become a real cultivator in the future. I will no longer be affected by my original birth, and the path of cultivation will be countless times smoother than before. Muda thought excitedly. With this thought, he could not wait to see Luo Fan immediately. He kowtowed to express his gratitude to Luo Fan. However, he knew that once he left this place, this sea of lightning would definitely collapse. If he were to come here again in the future, he wouldn't be able to find any more lightning creatures. The difficulty of cultivating the 12,960 strange beasts required for the body of the lightning son of heaven would increase countless times because of this. Therefore, he could only suppress the impulse in his heart and retract his power. He knelt on the palm and kowtowed 9 times in a row to thank Luo Fan for his kindness. After he kowtowed 9 times, the figure shook slightly. In a trance, Muda seemed to see the figure suddenly lower its head and smile at him. Then, his eyes flickered and everything in front of him returned to normal. Maybe my eyes are playing tricks on me. Muda could only smile bitterly. He could only smile bitterly like this. The more he interacted with Luo Fan, the more he felt that Luo Fan was unfathomable. When he met Luo Fan the last time, although he felt that Luo Fan was powerful, he still did not know where he was powerful. However, at this moment, he found that Luo Fan had become an incomparably deep black hole. No matter how he tried, he could not see the bottom of it. He could not even understand the various methods that Luo Fan had used. For example, whether this figure was a real statue or an illusory shadow, or was it condensed by some kind of power, or whether it was a remnant of spiritual consciousness. or whether it was just a simple dead object, or something else, he could not tell. In his feeling, everything that he experienced after seeing this figure was real and illusory and real. There was not a single trace that he could grasp. Under such circumstances, he could only comfort himself with the fact that his eyes were playing tricks on him. He could not understand what he had just seen. After a sigh, he turned around and instructed the lightning creatures that were guarding him, then led them away from the place where the figure was. It only took a few thousand years to get here. It's much faster than I expected. While he was in a trance, Muda seemed to have heard such a sigh. This voice was still very familiar to him, and it still seemed to contain endless mysteries. This time, without the interference of the content of the voice, Muda could more clearly understand the mystery of the voice itself. Faintly, the moment he heard this voice, a great figure with an earth-shattering aura that could not be contained by heaven and earth appeared in his eyes. That clear and bright face, those deep eyes, that power contained in every movement, impressively belonged to the figure of Luo Fan. Muda was taken aback and turned around to look. However, he discovered that there was nothing behind him. There was only a boundless sea of lightning surging violently behind him. There were only endless lightning creatures floating in the sea, fighting for their survival. Where's that giant? Muda's eyes were wide open and his mouth was agape. A sense of disbelief could be seen. Right now, he was not too far away from the giant figure. At most, the distance between them was less than 100 miles. This distance was not even as high as the figure's ankle. Normally, if he turned around to look at this time, he would only see that figure. The lightning sea and lightning creatures behind the figure would definitely not be seen by him. However, at this moment, it was clear that he did not see the figure at all. All he saw was the lightning sea and lightning creatures that were originally blocked by the figure. With such a change, anyone who saw it would know that the originally indomitable giant figure in the center of the lightning sea, which was like a statue, had completely disappeared. There was no movement, no sound, and no one paid attention to it. It was as if such a figure had never appeared there in the first place. It was so strange and mysterious that it was unimaginable. Muda stared blankly at the place where the figure had originally been. He suddenly had a feeling that this might be the last time he would see Brother Luo Fan. Perhaps Brother Luo Fan has already left Master's dojo. I should have guessed that with his personality, he must have arranged for my future before he left to prepare so many tests for me and give me so many benefits. Muda stared blankly at this unbelievable scene with an indescribable sense of loss on his face. Although he had existed for trillions of years, ever since he had developed a true will, Luo Fan was the first existence that could treat him as an equal. He was like the first person a baby saw when it was born. He had a different kind of feeling towards Luo Fan. This feeling might not be clear or obvious, but it was very important. At this moment, when he discovered that Luo Fan had already left and might never appear in front of him again, he naturally felt an indescribable sense of loss. In a trance, it was as if he had lost his most important goal. This was a feeling that Muda had never felt before. He stood there in a daze for a long time before he collected his thoughts. He thought to himself, perhaps I was wrong. I must quickly cultivate the lightning son of heaven's physique, then quickly return to the dojo to see if Brother Luo Fan has really left or not. Perhaps he hasn't left yet.